And now, it's Book TV's monthly in-depth program with best-selling author Jacqueline Woodson. Ms. Woodson's books include Brown Girl Dreaming, Another Brooklyn, and most recently, Harbor Me. Jacqueline Woodson has won the National Book Award and the Newbery Honor 3 times, among several other awards.
Jacqueline Woodson, from your most recent book, Harbor Me, describe Haley.
Haley is a young girl. I would call her kind of a tween. She's biracial, redheaded, being raised by her uncle, and introspective. She thinks a lot about life and where she is in this moment in time. She has a best friend, Holly, and she was my favorite character when I was writing that book until I developed the other ones, but she is the main character in Harbor Me.
Why is she being raised by her uncle?
She's being raised by her uncle because her father is incarcerated and her mom has passed away. So her uncle is her father's brother who gets custody of her.
Is he white or black?
Her uncle is white, yes. Her mom was black.
And on the cover of this book is a silhouette of 6 kids, tweens, I guess. Who are they?
On the cover are Amari, who's an African-American boy. There's Ashton, who's a white kid who moved from Connecticut. There is Holly, who's African-American, and Thiago, who's from Puerto Rico, and Esteban, who is Dominican Republic. They're all from the Dominican Republic, and they're all in the same class.
And where do they live?
Brooklyn and Crown Heights, in the Crown Heights section of Brooklyn, which is an interesting section right now for those of you who don't know it. It's changing very fast, and it used to be a predominantly Caribbean neighborhood, Caribbean and African American, and it's changing. I don't like to use the word gentrifying because I think all neighborhoods are gentrified. You know, good people live there, but people with more money are moving in. People with less money are getting pushed out.
Well, how long have you been in Brooklyn, and how much change have you seen?
I've been in Brooklyn since I was about 6 or 7 years old, and I grew up in the neighborhood of Bushwick, which I moved to when it was on the edge of white flight. White folks were moving out, Black and Latino people were moving in, and then it was a predominantly Black and Latino neighborhood, and now the block I lived on as a child is probably predominantly white again, because Bushwick swung the other way and became this kind of hipster neighborhood. Same with the neighborhood I live in now, which is Park Slope. You know, in the 70s, it was a large Caribbean population there. People came in, worked many jobs, bought homes. In the 90s, people from the Upper West Side started moving to the neighborhood. By the 2000s, it was considered the best place to live in New York by some magazine. And then people from all over started moving. So we live, on the block we live, we're a mixed race family, but we're the only family of color on our block. There's one other person of color.
So these 6 kids, they're misfits. Is that fair?
How do you define a misfit?
I'm going to let you do that.
I think
I'm going to let you challenge what I said.
I think that, to me, they're 6 of the most phenomenal kids I've ever met are created, and they're definitely on the outside of a lot of people's experiences, and they're on the they learn differently than other people. And I think for people who don't understand young people who learn differently or think differently, the initial thing is to other them in some way, and not see their brilliance and their beauty. And for me, they're 6 brilliant, beautiful kids who are trying to get through their childhood in America.
But they were othered, weren't they? By the system?
They were othered. They were othered by schoolmates. Yes, they were. The system tries to set them outside of itself. Is it successful? Sometimes it is. Sometimes they believe what the system is saying to them, and at the same time, with the help of each other, they're beginning to resist that and understand who they are.
One of the themes in the book is when Esteban says, "I think they took Poppy."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they
What's
took my
going on?
puppy. Esteban's dad goes missing. He works in a factory. He's undocumented. He comes home to his wife and son and daughter every night, and then one night he doesn't come home. And when the book opens, Esteban says, "I think they took my papi." And we come to find out that his father's been taken by ICE and is in the process of getting deported. And so, which throws a whole shift in Esteban's whole family, because now they're having to move in with cousins. He doesn't have his dad anymore. And for a long time, he doesn't know where his father is. So he is struggling. He hears this kid who was this other kind of kid, and suddenly he's introverted and sad and not communicative. And eventually we find out where his father is, and his father starts sending him poetry, because before his father was a dad, he was a poet.
Well, Jacqueline Woodson, throughout all of your work, and we have it stacked here, poetry plays a role.
Yes, it does. I think I couldn't be a writer without poetry. I think as a young person, I was afraid of it. I thought it was this kind of hidden code that I wasn't meant to understand. And as I discovered poets and the lyricism of poetry, I began to realize how much it mattered to me, the musicality of it, the white space, all the ways that, for me, it works with the narrative. So when I'm writing, I am reading everything I write out loud. I'm trying to hear how it sounds in the world, as well as paying attention to how it looks on the page. And so I'm trying to limb the poetic part and the narrative part.
So when you write a book like Harbor Me, do you base it on real life events going on? Is that how you drew this story?
I feel like Harbor Me has been coming to me for a long time. I think we look at the book now and think of it as current events, but the things that have been happening to those young people has been happening in our country for a very long time. The issues of deportation, of mass incarceration, the troubling history of what happens to young brown boys in this country, everything, the othering of people who learn differently. I think what happened with Harbor Me is I'm constantly trying to figure stuff out. Like, where do we find the hope in this, right? Where do we find the hope when we look around and everything happening feels so negative? And I began to write these children into existence and write that hope in their lives into existence. So I think someone could look at it and say, oh, these are ripped from the headlines. It's like, yeah, maybe the headlines of 1990, headlines of 1980, 1970, 1950, but they're histories that people have been dealing with a long time.
Why do you think you write for young adults and for children?
Because someone told me that's who I write for. I think the literature is for anyone who comes to it, right? I think it's told from the perspective of young people, and that is what makes it marketed as literature for young people, right? When you look at Another Brooklyn, the girls are 15, 16 in that book, but it's being told from the point of view of an adult, so that makes it adult fiction. Whereas Harbor Me is being told from the point of view of a 10, 11, 12-year-old. And I feel like that's where I have the most memory. Between the ages of 7 and 17, I can mine my own experiences as a young person and bring them to the experiences of my character. And I think for so many writers, you choose the age that you're kind of stuck in to write from. So a lot of people will write characters in their 30s or characters in their 20s. For me, it was characters between 7 and, like 17 maybe.
Who are the 4 girls in Another Brooklyn?
In Another Brooklyn, there's Sylvia, Angela, Gigi, and August. And they are growing up in Bushwick in the 1970s.
And?
And they are coming of age against the backdrop of what it means to be Black, what it means to be female, what it means to have your parents' backstories laid upon you in a way that you kind of want to resist, what it means to deal with mortality and mental illness to some extent, what it means to deal with a life in which your narrative is not believed, or your narrative is something that doesn't feel like it can actually exist. So when you have a character like Gigi who wants to be an entertainer, and the world kind of doesn't believe that. But it's the interesting thing about Another Brooklyn is it's poetry, it's nonfiction, and it's fiction. So all the stuff about Bushwick in the 1970s is true. You know, I went back and researched it. I went to the Brooklyn Historical Society and did some research. I read articles. I remembered stuff from my own childhood and Bushwick, but so that's nonfiction. The white flight, the blackout, I don't know if I get the garbage strike in there, but all the stuff that was happening in that neighborhood during that time is true. And then we have the four girls, which is the fiction, right? I made up these four characters and gave them four very different lives. And then we have the poetry, which is the way the book is written, with the white space and the pauses, the places where I'm asking the reader to just take a breath and absorb it and not just try to race through this book because there's a lot going on in it.
Well, you keep bringing up Brooklyn, and this is a tweet by Deborah Taylor, one of our viewers, who wants to know, can you discuss the importance of place in your work?
Oh, yes, I can. And thanks, Deborah Taylor, for tweeting. Place plays a huge role. My books are usually character-driven, and after I have a sense of the character, the place is really important to who the characters become. So Brooklyn is a place that is very, very familiar to me. This area of Crown Heights, where Harbor Me takes place, is not as familiar, so I had to walk around the neighborhood to get a better understanding of it. But once I decide where the book is going to be set, I tend to visit that place and try to figure out what the connection is that place has to the characters. In the case of Bushwick in the 1970s, it was changing rapidly, and these girls were changing rapidly. In the case of Harbor Me, Crown Heights is another changing space. And thinking in the case of If You Come Softly, we have Ellie, who lives on the Upper West Side, and Jeremiah, who lives in Brooklyn, and the place they meet is the East Side. So I think about landscape, I think about where it's set. When you have Miracles Boys, that book takes place over a weekend in Upper Manhattan. And I wanted to move out of Brooklyn. I wanted to move out of my comfort zone in a lot of ways. So with Miracles Boys, I wanted to write a book where there were no girls in it, because I had written all these books that have female protagonists at their core. And then I wanted to take it out of Brooklyn because Brooklyn felt almost easy to me, and I wanted to challenge myself. But and then we look at Brown Girl Dreaming, where we have my places, right? We have Ohio, South Carolina, and Brooklyn, and they all have an impact on me in a different way. I can go on.
Well, Meth Moon.
Beneath the Meth Moon.
There's
yes.
a place, but it's not really a place, is it? Is that?
Yeah.
I could never identify where Donnersville was. Was I supposed to be able to?
No, Donnersville is not real. So, but Pass Christian is.
Right.
So
Louisiana,
it starts out in Mississippi after Katrina. And that was very intentional, because when Katrina happened, I was a new mom, and I kind of shut it out, right? When you have you have all of this negative information coming to you, you're just trying to bring a kid into the world or raise a kid. And then all the media around Katrina died down, right? And for me, I was thinking, so what happened to the people? They must still, there's still people displaced. There's still people whose lives have changed forever. And at the same time, I was watching the way meth usage was growing in the United States, and asking myself, why would anyone even begin to do a drug like this? And the result of it was Beneath a Meth Moon. And one of the reasons I didn't name that place that they moved to, which is probably somewhere in the Midwest, is because I wanted that to be kind of anywhere USA, where, because this epidemic was happening in so many places.
You seem different, Kaylee said to me one night when I actually did make it back to her house. Maybe a month had passed since T-Boom had first shown me the moon. Kaylee and I were sitting on her bed, but I was twitching to be back with T-Boom, and my head was throbbing. I was annoyed at Kaylee. What did she know about anything? She never kissed anyone, had never felt someone like T-Boom holding her, had never known the moon.
Yeah, the old moon. So moon, as you know, is meth, and she doesn't call it moon, and that's part of her denial, of course. But for me, also going back to kind of the surreal poetry of the narrative, it was actually more comforting for me to write moon all the time too, instead of meth. When I was researching the book, one thing I did not do was look at any photos of people who were addicted to meth, because I didn't want to have to imagine what she was going to look like, what she was looking like. But I wanted to have a sense of what Laurel was feeling internally.
Well, describe Laurel that you envision.
So, describe her physically or all kinds of ways. So I envisioned her as this kid who is lost, and had not always been that way. She was very grounded before she left Mississippi. She lived with her mom, her grandma. She was very connected to her grandmother. Her dad was very connected to the land. And she was a great big sister to her little brother. And then her world literally got washed away. And with it, their grounding. And so even in Beneath the Meth Moon, her looking back from this place of finally no longer being addicted, there's still her longing. So with the washing away comes this longing to kind of have an ordinary life again. And trying to find that. She becomes a cheerleader, she gets a boyfriend, she gets a best friend, and she tries to be this teenager. And then it turns out her boyfriend is using meth and gets her addicted, and it kind of turns her life around. And then, of course, it's the hero's journey. So with that comes the character of Moses, who's struggling with his own demons, but is not wanting to see her die in this way that feels like, I think, failure to him. And so Moses is this character. What he gets paid to paint murals of young people who have overdosed, and so he paints these murals all over the town, and they become really good friends.
Is that name on purpose?
It is. I was very intentional about Moses, and of course, you as a writer, you have plans, and the book never does what you plan for it to do. So I had this idea that he was, kind of the Moses or the Harriet Tubman, and moving people to the promised land first as an artist, right? He immortalizes these young people, and then as a friend, but he became his own complicated, beautiful character, and by the end of the book, I just adored him. So I don't know. I was like, I don't want the book to end because I want to spend some more time with Moses and Laurel, and the Laurel that we meet at the beginning of the book, the Laurel who's kind of found her way.
You can't tell from the cover if Laurel is white or black, and doesn't matter.
Huh, you really can't. I guess not.
You cover the face.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
I mean, I presumed her to be white.
She is white, but that long blonde hair doesn't give it away. It's true. It's interesting because the old cover, the hardcover, didn't have a photo at all. It was just a brown cover with Beneath the Meth Moon and kind of meth around the
Was
O.
this photo created for this book?
It was created for, yes, the paperback.
And did you take a part in
I
developing
okayed
this?
it. Yeah, I get to give the final say on my covers. And sometimes it's a compromise. Sometimes I'm like, okay, okay, okay. And sometimes I'm like, yes.
I celebrated my 15th birthday sitting in the rain begging for money. That's Kate. That's Laurel talking. For you do most of your tween books. I think I want to say all of them in the first person.
Let me think. Hush is first person. If You Come Softly is first and third person, and you know why that is, right? Yeah, Harbor Me is first person. I can't remember. I think Melon and Sun is first person.
Yep.
Yeah. Do I? Oh, Behind You is second person. So, and I feel like there's some third person.
The children's books, the real children's books, are all third person.
Okay. Yeah. I guess I'm not aware of that.
Okay. Do you do that on
Good
purpose?
point, Peter. Look at me looking at them. Yep, those are all. Yep, all first person.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's because they're character driven, and I have such a sense of that character who's telling the story, so they become the first person.
Is it easy to write a white girl voice or a white boy voice for you, or a black boy voice?
You know, none of it is easy. It's not without struggle, but I think one thing that I have that I'm grateful for is a very diverse community, and I can say to my partner, is this white voice? Does this feel like a white person?
Your partner's white?
My partner's white. You know, our kids are biracial. You know, close family that's Puerto Rican, that's Korean, that's black, that's biracial, and so there are all these places, these friends that I can bounce it off of. But I feel like at the core of it, it's me always, right? So every character from Laurel to Jeremiah to Lonnie to Taswiya, there's Jacqueline Woodson in there, and that's kind of, I start with what I know and then kind of work outward from there. So I think that question of like, what is whiteness, right? And asking that, what makes this character white? So that's what I kind of have to answer in creating the character. And the same, what makes this character male with someone like Melon and Sun. I remember I wrote that, as I say, BC, before children, and for me, Melanin was the son I wanted to have one day, right? I wanted to have this kid who was thoughtful, who cared about the environment, who adored his mother, and so I created this character who I really liked as a result.
Is Jackson Leroy Melon and Sun?
There is. You know, careful what you ask for. I think there's a lot of Melon and Sun in Jackson Leroy, because he's a very sweet kid. He cares deeply about everything from gender to the environment, loves his moms, and is a thoughtful kid, a really thoughtful kid.
Well, Jacqueline Woodson, the writing in Melon and Sun, when you look at the language from rather than a young girl's perspective, a lot rougher, a lot more boyish writing, all on purpose?
It's very purposeful. I think Melon and Sun is my first boy character, the first time. And that was, I might have written a short story or two that had guys in it, but in terms of someone who very deeply identified as boy, here was Melon and Sun. And the question for me was, what do you know, guys who identify as guys do when they're hanging out? And I tried to ask my little brother, and he couldn't remember anything much. And so I went and thought about who the kids were I'd like to have. So there's a lot of kind of not so much roughhousing, but verbal roughhousing. So they shoot quips back and forth to each other. They kind of hang out a lot. And of them, Melanin is probably the most thoughtful, but his two friends are also kind of funny characters.
And that came out in 1995. It's got words like faggy and dyke in it. Did you have trouble with that one as far as censors or reaction?
I think people felt some kind of way about it. But and I definitely got letters early on. I remember getting a stack of letters from this school somewhere in Washington State where all the kids were like, I had done an interview in Out magazine, and they mentioned that this was going to be Scholastic's first book that dealt with gay issues. And so then these teachers had their students write, and the letters had all of these misspelled words and grammatical errors. And I was like, okay, let's teach them how to write before we teach them how to hate and teach them how to censor. But that was, Scholastic was very protective of the book too. And they didn't say ever, we're not going to publish it. They published it in a way that I wasn't loving. It wasn't in the book club, it was in a particular space, Blue Sky Press, which was a small imprint. So it just went to certain places, but it wasn't like, here's our huge queer book that we're doing. I mean, they were quiet about it. And it definitely got, I remember hearing about a school in Brooklyn where they gave it out to all the 6th grade class, and a parent read it and got upset, and the principal said over the loudspeaker that everyone had to return it, and they got 2 copies back because all you have to do is censor a book, and then every kid is going to want to read it. But I think as a writer, you're protected from that, right? I don't know what's happening in New Jersey or Iowa or San Diego with my books, right? Maybe they're in the classroom, maybe they're not. But so you don't always know when and how your books are getting censored. But I think that it being Scholastic's first queer book and it having that kind of language in it, people definitely were like,
Another theme in a lot of your books, it seems to me, is a missing parent.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
I think it was Roald Dahl who said that in order for kids to have their adventure, you have to get rid of the parents. And so I think I start with, I want the kid to be able to tell their story. And the truth of it is, a lot of people have missing parents. A lot of people have parents who are incarcerated, or have parents who are divorced, or have parents who have died, or have one parent who has died. So I think I also want to speak to, we grew up reading about the quote unquote nuclear family, right? Mom, dad, sister, brother. And that is so not the reality of so many people. And I want to respect that and represent that in the literature, that there are all kinds of ways that we have family.
Where were you born?
I was born in Columbus, Ohio in 1963. And then we moved to South Carolina.
Why?
We moved to South Carolina because my parents divorced. My parents separated. They didn't divorce. And I'll tell you why I say separated. But when I was 2 months old, my mom and dad separated. We moved to South Carolina, and we lived with my grandparents, with my grandmother and my grandfather. And then from there, as part of the Great Migration, we moved to New York City. And my mom was a single mom there. And then when my grandfather died, my grandmother moved to New York City with us. So I was being raised by my mom and my grandma until I was about 13 or 14, and then my parents got back together, which I don't recommend. But they got back together, and they stayed together for about 6 or 7 years until I went off to college.
In Brown Girl Dreaming, when you talk about South Carolina, it seems rather idyllic.
Yeah, I still love the South. I mean, I think it's home. And it's interesting because until my mom died, until my grandma died, they always referred to it as home. And they had been living in New York City for many, many, many years at that point. And me too, I think of it as going home. When I get to South Carolina, when I get back to Greenville, or any part of South Carolina actually, there's this deep familiarity to the land, and the way it smells, the way the people move, the food, the architecture. Even though Greenville has changed a lot, it feels like home to me.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to Book TV. This is our another edition in our special fiction in-depth year. And this month it's young adult and children's author Jacqueline Woodson. She's got 24, 25 books, something like that. We'll try to scroll through them as we go, but this is your chance. If you grew up reading Jacqueline Woodson, or if your kids are reading Jacqueline Woodson, here's your chance to talk with the author. We're going to put the numbers up on the screen. 202 is the area code. 748-8200 for those of you who live in the East and Central time zones. 748-8201 for those of you out in the Mountain and Pacific time zones. And we do encourage the tweens, the younger generation, if you are a reader of Jacqueline Woodson, you know, ask mom and dad and see if you can call in. I know she'd like to hear from you. We also have social media ways of getting a hold of us today. You can do that via Facebook, Twitter, and email. @BookTV is our handle for Facebook and Twitter. Our email, booktv@cspan.org. And we'll begin taking those calls in just a few minutes. You won the National Book Award for Brown Girl Dreaming.
I did.
What was that like?
The year that I won it, it was my my third time maybe being a finalist. And I remember the first time I was a finalist, it was like, maybe I'll win. The second time I was a finalist, I was like, I'm definitely going to win. I had my speech in my sock and in my boots, and I was ready, and I didn't win. And then this time when I was a finalist, I was like, okay, I'm not going to win. I've gotten used to being a finalist, and it's good. I love, you still get a medal, you still get this attention to your book. So when they called my name, I was stunned, and it's hard to surprise me. So I was very, very surprised that they were saying, and the winner of this year's National Book Award for Young People's Literature is Jacqueline Woodson. So it was kind of this pause of hearing my name and then realizing it was me, and then running up onto the stage while all of my family was screaming and cheering me on.
Well, Daniel Handler was the MC that year, the man who was known as Lemony Snicket. And there was a little bit of an incident. We want to show that video and get you to respond to it.
Okay.
And I said that if she won, I would tell all of you something I learned about her this summer, which is that Jackie Woodson is allergic to watermelon. Just let that sink in your mind. And I said, you have to put that in a book. And she said, you put it in a book. And I said, I'm only writing a book about a black girl who's allergic to watermelon if I get a blurb from you, Cornel West, Toni Morrison, and Barack Obama saying, this guy's okay. This guy's fine. All right.
So, yeah.
Took a little of the joy out of it, didn't it?
Nope. It did not. And I think that's the interesting thing, that people assume that Daniel was able to take the moment away from me, and to give him that kind of power. And I didn't. I mean, that didn't sink in till the next day. And it was funny because when he was saying that, I was downstairs, and my friend Toshi Regan, who was sitting next to me, she's like, he's messing up. He's messing up. He's really messing up. And I was like, what? Because I was all about that I just won the National Book Award. And so, but when I was in the audience, I was like, wait a second, why is he saying this? It really didn't sink in until the next day, and it was all over the media. And then I was like, wow, something else just happened besides me winning the National Book Award. The thing that did happen was everywhere, every time in the media, Jacqueline Woodson wins the National Book Award, there was a picture of him, because that incident followed it. And Toshi Regan, again, was like, okay, we need to get together and go and let the media know that that's not the face we should see when we're talking about Jacqueline Woodson winning the National Book Award. And so there was this whole hashtag about let's celebrate Jacqueline Woodson. And there was a lot of energy around it, and people coming out of it, and just coming together and saying something different needs to happen around this. But in that moment, and never, I mean, did I let him steal my glory? I'm way too strong for that. And but I did think that wasn't the smart thing to do. It was shtick. It was so uninformed, and that's why weeks later, and then the media was calling me left and right, not to say congratulations for winning the award, but what is your response to this? And I wouldn't answer. I'm like, I have nothing to say because I just won the National Book Award, and I was rolling in that. And also, I wasn't going to soundbite. I was going to think about this and really think about what it all meant, and how to respond to it, and what I came. Same way I write books. Like I'm trying to. I write because I have all these questions, not because I have answers. And I wanted to address that comment and answer actually why it was a hot mess of a thing to say, and I think a lot of times people don't know the history of watermelon and the racism around watermelon and people of color, and so that's why I ended up writing the piece for the New York Times about the history of the watermelon joke, because I think people are like, oh, black people allergic to watermelon, black people eating watermelon, look at this black. It's like, and laughing about that, it's like, do you have any idea of the historical context of how people died because of this? And so I felt like what it did was it gave me this platform to really have this deeper conversation about race and racism in this country. But the other thing that a lot of people were writing about is like, oh, Daniel Handler stole the moment from Jacqueline Woodson. No, he did not. No, that was my moment, and I still own it.
That was in 2014. Have you spoken to him since?
Yeah, we've spoken. Yeah, we knew each other. We know each other. So yeah, we've spoken.
What's a showway?
A showway is a map. And during the times of enslavement, people would have different codes along the Underground Railroad to help people get to the next place. And sometimes it was quilts that had these coded maps on them. Sometimes it was markings on trees. Sometimes it was the North Star or something on a house pointed in some direction. But all of these different codes. And I remember I was in Kentucky somewhere, and this white woman said to me, well, this isn't true. This is a myth about how enslaved people made it to freedom, because there's nothing written about it, or no one wrote about it. And I said, who would write about it? People weren't allowed to read and write. Like, why would an enslaved person write this down if they could write, or when they could write? Why would they go to their master and say, hey, look, we got this thing going on? Like, of course, so much of our history is oral history, because that was the safest way to have history. It still feels like a kind of safe way to have history sometimes, but that's what a showway is.
Is Suni a real person?
Suni is my great-great-grandma. Yeah, my grandmother's mother.
And in that book, you say that history forgot her.
Yeah, history went and lost her name. No, history lost her mother's name. So history went and lost her name years later. Suni came. And Suni's mother's name we never knew. And it wasn't written. We have so much history written down when we could write it down, or stuff that people remembered, but no one knew Suni's mom's name.
These are, every one of these, and I want to show some of these children's books as we go. I'm calling them children's books, Jacqueline Woodson. Who is this written for? 3, 4-year-olds? 8-year-olds? I don't know.
Showway would probably be for about 6 or 7 and up.
Okay. And you've worked with a lot of different illustrators.
Yes.
Do you do that on purpose?
I do. I chose Hudson Talbot for that book because he works with so many different mediums. And in that book, he uses collage and oil paintings and drawings, and it's just, and because the book is moving through so much time, it made sense.
I want to show just a little bit of this. And we want to hear from Angela, who's calling in from Raleigh, North Carolina. Angela, you're on with author Jacqueline Woodson.
What a delight this is. I love C-SPAN, and I am not familiar with Jacqueline Woodson, but she spoke to me because I am an 80-year-old black woman raised in the Brooklyn section of Bushwick during the 40s and the 50s.
Huh.
and she was talking about the transition of the 70s. But I remember when it originally transformed in the late 40s and the early 50s, and basically the same thing is happening again. She reminds me of Pauline Marshall, who wrote Brown Girl, Brown Stones, which talked about the transition of the early 50s, the years ago. I am so delighted to hear her speak, and I will read as much of her as I can, but I definitely will read Harper Me, because that speaks to my heart, and Brooklyn. So thank you so much, Jacqueline Woodson, for being the delightful entrepreneur in literature that you are.
Angela, before you hang up, two things. Why are you now living in Raleigh, North Carolina? And tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, my husband and I moved to North Carolina in 1999 for a new beginning. And also, I am a clinical social worker who has always been involved with the life of people, particularly those who are in need. And so this speaks to my passion, speaks to my history, and speaks to my learning. And so I'm just so excited to finally have called C-SPAN, which I have watched since the early 90s. Thank you so much, Jacqueline, for being who you are. Thank you, Peter, because I watch you too.
Thank you, ma'am. What if an 80-year-old picked up some of your books?
Well, first,
And is there one you'd recommend to Angela?
Angela, thanks so much for calling in. And well, I love that you mentioned Pauline Marshall's Brown Girl, Brown Stones, because that's such a phenomenal book. And it's true. I think it actually takes place in Crown Heights, if I'm not mistaken, or what's probably now Prospect Heights. But I would suggest, yeah, definitely Harbor Me. And Another Brooklyn, to see some of your hometown as it existed in the 70s. So thanks for calling.
So can an 80-year-old get something out of your books?
I think,
Or a 70-year-old or a 50-year-old?
the funny thing is, I have gotten so many fan letters from people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. I've gotten letters from white men who knew my grandfather, and when they read Brown Girl Dreaming, and I don't know how they even got their hands on it, they wrote like, you know, Hope was my baseball coach, and he was such a lovely man, and it's just amazing how that book has spoken to so many people across the lines of race and age and gender. And I think what so many people say is, I hadn't thought about young people's literature this way. And I think a lot more people are turning to young people's literature, because I think it pushes boundaries, it asks questions, it makes people think, it makes people remember themselves as young people. So yeah, I think the same way there are adult books that young people can get stuff out of, there are young people's literature that adults can get stuff out of. And I don't even just mean the middle grade and the young adult, I mean the picture books. A lot of more innovative teachers are using picture books in their high school classrooms to teach about story, to teach about character, to teach about device and poetry. So something for everyone, I think.
Let's hear from Martha in Belgrade Lakes, Maine. Hi, Martha.
Oh, hi, Peter, and hi, Jackie Woodson. Congratulations on your 3 books that were recognized in the nomination, and of course your win is just wonderful to hear about, and the way you handled the debacle, congratulations again for ignoring it. My question to you was kind of stolen by the prior caller and also Peter. I'm in my 70s. I'm a retired elementary teacher, and I just love children's literature. So which of your 3 nominated books would you recommend for me to look for first at my public library?
Okay, Martha, before you hang up, before we get an answer from Jacqueline Woodson, you sent me a painting. Is that a painting that you did yourself?
Oh, no. I commissioned my favorite South Carolina artist who lives in Columbia. Her name is Dawn Caldwell. She's done several.
Oh, that was a terrific painting there with your favorite books and everything.
Oh,
Martha's a
yeah,
regular
yeah.
viewer, so.
Yeah.
That was terrific, and I've been meaning to write to you and tell you that, so I'll just tell you here publicly. So thank you
Well,
very much for
thank you,
that.
Peter.
Thank you for that. Now let's get an answer from Jacqueline Woodson.
So great. I think I would be interested in knowing first what grades you taught, what elementary school grades you taught.
Martha, you still with us?
Yeah, I taught 5th grade in Maryland Public Schools, and then I was promoted down to 1st grade. But 2nd grade is what I ended up in because it's like a one-room schoolhouse. You're teaching everything in 2nd grade.
And she's summers in Maine and winters in South Carolina.
Oh, wow. So I would say Brown Girl Dreaming. That's the book I would recommend you begin with, which is the National Book Award winner.
And that's a nonfiction, basically.
That's nonfiction. That's a memoir.
That's an autobiography. Tell us about your grandparents in South Carolina.
Okay, so my grandparents were Gunnar Irby and Georgiana Scott Irby, and I adored them. I particularly adored my grandfather. I always tell the story of how back in the day, parents were allowed to say which child was their favorite. We're not allowed to do that anymore. But my grandfather would always say, well, Jackie, you know you're my favorite. And my brothers were my mom and grandmother's favorite. My sister was my uncle's favorite. So everyone had a favorite, so it was all good. But they were a serious rock in our family. You know, when my mom separated, she came back home to Greenville with 3 kids, and they were there. They were there, ready to raise us, ready to help us out. She had gone to Sterling High School in Greenville. My grandparents had lived there for many, many years, so we had all of this community. My Aunt Lucinda was there, and it was just, bless you. It was just a lovely place to be a child. I can't not be under a pine tree now and not think of Greenville, but they were hardworking. They were religious. My grandmother was a Jehovah's Witness, and they were definitely, I think, part of the reason I'm a storyteller, part of the reason I'm so grounded, part of the reason I have such a hold on history and family, and my grandfather was a gardener, and just really believed in using the land and giving back to the land. And I think as we look at issues like global warming and our impact on land, I turn back to him as an ancestor and remember the importance of it.
And your grandmother took you around as a Jehovah's Witness, didn't she?
Yeah. No, we had to go from door to door. We had to go out and fill service. We had, Bible study on Monday night. We had, I forgot what we did on Tuesday night, but it was something. And then ministry school, then Watchtower studies Saturday night, then Watchtower at the Kingdom Hall Sunday. We were pretty regimented, and it's a text-based religion, so there's a lot of studying involved, which made studying and writing and concentrating later on very familiar to me. It was something I had always done. I'd always deconstructed text, but we had to go. It was always so mortifying to go out and fill service and fear you're going to knock on the door of one of your friends or someone's going to think you're begging for money. And I think part of it was I didn't understand that I was proselytizing, right? That what I was trying to do is create some kind of salvation for people. That was the belief. All I knew that it was Saturday morning and I was a child and I wanted to be out playing. And I'm not a witness anymore, but I look back on it and I think that's the thing about having a grounding in a religion is you get to take what you need from it when you get clarity about it enough. And one thing you learn as a witness is that you're in the world, but you're not of the world. So when the world starts treating you or other people as other, you're like, well, I've always been outside of this narrative, so I'm good. But I think also being able to concentrate for long hours, not being afraid to be bored, is something that I learned by being bored as a child. But it also is something that kind of helped me figure out who I was becoming. And this is who I became.
Next call for Jacqueline Woodson is Marlena in Sterling, Virginia, here in the suburbs. Hi, Marlena.
Hi, how are you guys doing today? Ms. Woodson, I have a craft question for you, actually. As an aspiring writer myself, I wonder, do you start out with a character in mind, or do you start out, or a person in mind, or do you start out with a story in mind first and then go from there?
What about you, Marlena?
Character. I start out with a character in mind first, and then quickly, I have a story for them.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for your question, Marlena. My books are character-driven, so I tend to start out with a character. And the truth of it is you put two people in a room, you have everything, right? You have story, you have plot, you have dialogue. Then the minute they start talking, you have plot. Something's going to happen. But I do start out with a character and then let the character take me where they're going to take me. But a lot of times I don't know what's going to happen until much later in the book, but I just let the character kind of do what they need to do. And my big question is, what does this character want and how are they going to get it? And the story ends up answering that.
Robert is in Kilgore, Texas. Good morning, Robert, or good afternoon.
Hello, how you doing, Pete? I'm really enjoying your show. I've enjoyed all of your shows. And thank you for doing the fiction edition. Ms. Woodson, I want to ask you about If You Come Softly. I have really enjoyed that book and read it many times. I think I look at it as being one of the best books that's ever been written, not in YA, but period. And I wanted to just tell you how much I enjoy your books. And I never look at you as being a young adult writer. I put you with James Baldwin, Richard Wright, Toni Morrison, and I just wanted to thank you for all the great work you have done. Thank you.
Now, Robert, what is it about If You Come Softly that grabs you?
Oh, the words, the way she used the words so poetically. And sometimes as adults, we get older and we think love is different as adults. But when you find that kind of love at that age, it stays with you for a lifetime. And the characters in the book were so strong that I've never forgotten it. It's still one of my best love stories I've ever read.
Robert, what do you do in Kilgore?
Oh, I'm a chemical operator for Eastman Kodak.
Thank you so much. Jeremiah and Ellie.
Yes, thanks so much, Robert. That completely made my day. Anytime someone uses James Baldwin name in the same sentence with mine, I get very happy. That is, it's a retelling of Romeo and Juliet, and it's amazing. It's celebrating its 20th anniversary. And again, someone would look at that book and say, oh, she just ripped this from today's headlines. And no, it was written 20 years ago. And I think 20 years ago, before social media and before so much of what's happening in our communities was not public information in that way, people didn't know that this was going on. But again, so Jeremiah his voice is in third person and Ellie's voice is in first person, and you find out why. But I just really loved writing that love story. I just think that it's a book that's very, very close to my heart. And I remember it was after my daughter was born that I ended up writing Behind You. So I waited many, many years to write a sequel to If You Come Softly. But at the end of the day, If You Come Softly is the one that I turn to when I want to remember, as you said, Robert, what it was like to be young and newly in love, and how you saw so much of the world more clearly through that new love.
Interracial love, white liberal racism.
Mm-hmm.
Couple of the issues involved in that book.
Yep. The recognition of one's own whiteness and white privilege, which I don't use those words, police brutality, Black African American class stuff in terms of being an upper middle class African American and assumptions that are made about you. A gay person who's racist, which I think people think if you have if you're outside in one kind of way that you can understand everyone else's issues, and that's not the truth. So yeah, a lot's going on there.
Jacqueline Woodson, another theme that comes out, at least to me in your books, window gazing. Gazing out a lot of windows. Is that on purpose?
Yeah, Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop talks about the importance of young people having both mirrors and windows in their books. And so mirrors are books where you read them and you see some part of yourself in it, right? So it's a reflection of you, and you get excited because you recognize yourself as legitimate out in the world. And when a window book is a book that you look through and you read and you are aware of someone else's existence, something that you might not have ever thought about. A mom coming out, the witness protection program, a kid using meth, and those are books that enlighten you to other people's experiences. And I think my characters look out windows in that kind of way to represent them gazing into other worlds and what might be and what could be and what they're longing for. So it's symbolic, it's metaphorical, but it's also physically true.
Okay, you said earlier that when your books go out in the world, you don't know what happens to them or what. Do you let go of the characters? Do you let go of the books at that point too? Do you feel an ownership?
I let go of people's opinions of them, right? Because the books are going to go out into the world and people are going to have their particular experiences with the narrative. But I still am protective of my characters. I still care about them deeply and think, some part of me wants them to be okay. And I think when other readers say, like with Robert, tell me how much they love them and how much they meant to them, then I'm like, okay, they're okay. They're having their life in the world. They're impacting, and they're doing what they were brought here to do.
Well, do you think we might 20 years later, 23 years later, hear about Melon and Sun and what he's up to and what his mother and Kristen are up to?
It's so funny because someone asked me that about Harbor Me, because the kids plan to meet again in 20 years.
Right.
And it started me thinking, wow, what if I wrote my characters as adults? They stay young, like Jeremiah and Ellie are both still 15, 20 years later. But that's an interesting question. I think about that now that someone brought it up, and I can't even imagine who is Taswiyah now? Is she able to be Taswiyah again?
No,
Does she
still
want to
Evie.
be? Yeah. So I don't know. It's a really interesting thing. I wonder if other authors let their characters go or reimagine them. And I think that I guess we could look at another Brooklyn and see some adult characters, but I don't know what books they'd be from because those girls feel so different to me.
Who is Ava DuVernay?
Ava DuVernay is, one of the most important film people of all time. Selma, Wrinkle in Time, 13th. She's rocking and rolling in the film industry as a director, as a filmmaker, and she's brilliant. Why do you ask?
Because at the top of your Twitter page, you have a tweet by Ava DuVernay pinned to the top of your page. Just know that everyone's writing is terrible until it's not. No one's stuff is right immediately. You gotta work it, refine it, shape it, spend time with it. It's a relationship, and that's okay.
The woman speaks the truth. So when she tweeted that, it was just everything I wanted to say about writing, about creating, and she says it so succinctly that for me it felt the right thing to put as a pen, because I think so many people who follow me on Twitter and social media in general are following me because they're either teachers or writers or people who are aspiring writers. And one of the questions I get a lot is, how do you and that answers it.
Gita, Knoxville, Tennessee. Hi, Gita.
Hello, Jacqueline. Maybe I look like you. I've learned about American culture from Gone with the Wind. Like I would be like frizzy in Gone with the Wind, defiant. I like color purple more than Leave It to Beaver. I mean, yes. Now that I want to be, now I think I should be a sweet, a nice old woman. What do I tell my young children? Every time I go to work, my only goal is I want to keep my job. I like my paycheck. And what do I tell young people?
Can I add? So
Yes.
what do you tell young people about what, Gita?
How can I be your role model? I'm probably older than you. How can I be your role model?
Are you asking how can you be your young people's role model, or?
Yeah, for people like you, I have had lots of privileges, lots of education, lots of skills.
And so I'm sorry, I'm just not quite sure what you're asking. You're asking how can you be a role model if you don't have access to the skills?
Oh no, what do you want in 20 years?
What do I want in 20 years?
Yes.
It's a good question. I want to be here and I want to be healthy. I want my family to be healthy. I want the world to be healthy. I want people to have access to healthcare and education and food, basic stuff. I mean, I think I want the same things that I want today. I feel like as a writer, I each day is a gift, right? As a human being, each day is a gift, and a gift that a day that I'm allowed to do the work that I love doing. And I think that it's really important for all of us at some point, as hard as it is, to find that moment to do the thing you love to do. And so yeah, in 20 years, all willing, I would like to still be doing the stuff I love to do.
Max Pell, Facebook comment. Thank you so much to Jacqueline for her beautiful books with amazing stories and images. I love using her work with my students because even if reading presents a challenge, there is so much to learn and share based on the emotions, thoughts, and questions provoked by the imagery and narrative. Please keep blessing us with these outstanding works. Noticed on your website that you have requested that students not email you with a need for an answer within an hour.
Yes.
Does this happen a lot?
It does.
In,
Not anymore.
Oh my God, I have a paper due tomorrow morning. What did you mean by this?
Yes.
Type thing?
Yes, and can you, I just have a couple of questions for you. What is the main theme in Hush? Who are the main characters? Where does the book take place? I mean,
As in, I haven't read the book.
Yes, can you
explain
tell me?
it to me?
Exactly.
And do you respond to those?
I used to, not with the answers. I would say, this sounds like your homework assignment, and I'm not doing that for you. Then I would get ones where it's like, my teacher said, if I write you a letter and you write me back, I'll get extra credit. And I will say, tell your teacher to write me because I want to talk to them about this. Because that's a lot of pressure to put not only on the student, but on the writer who's getting, 300 letters a day. This is like, if she writes you back, then you're worthy of extra credit. What kind of message is that? So I used to, now I don't. People can't access me in the same way. I mean, they found other ways to access me, but not through the website.
Do you speak in classrooms very often?
Not as much as I used to. As ambassador, I'm going around doing some work.
And explain what that is.
So I'm currently National Ambassador for Young People's Literature, which is an award I received from the Library of Congress and the Children's Book Council. And there's a big medal that's out there somewhere. It's heavy. And basically, I get to choose a platform, and I get to visit places that are important to me. So my platform is Reading Equals Hope Times Change, which is if we read, we not only begin to feel more hopeful, but we have the ability to create change, or that reading changes us. And I've been going to juvenile detention centers and underserved schools and prisons because I wanted to go to the places where where authors don't always go, and give people that kind of access to the information I can give them, and help them understand how important literature is, and get them access to the literature.
And you're here in D.C. because?
I'm here in D.C. because I was presenting at the National Book Festival, which was fabulous, with Dr. Carla Hayden, who was the head of the Library of Congress, and signing books and talking to young people and getting to talk to you. So it's been good.
What was the National Book Festival like for you? How long did you sign? What were the crowds? What's the reaction you get to people when you're out and about?
I get a lot of great young people swarming me. And
when you say that, boys and girls, or
yes,
mostly girls?
Boys and girls, black and white, lots of, this time there were a lot of Southeast Asian kids, Latino kids. I love how diverse the National Book Festival is. Anywhere between like 4 or 5 years old, all the way up to teenagers. It was crazy. Lots of adults, lots of teachers in the audience. I mean, it was absolutely packed, and I signed for hours. And after I spoke, they all swarmed the stage, and there was one girl who must have been about 5 years old. She's going to be the next president because she jumped on that stage and got what she needed to get, and then got me to take a picture with her, and she was done. She was fabulous. I posted her back on my one of my social media pages because I don't like posting faces of kids. I met these 2 kids. I remember Amber Rain and Keegan, who are CODA children of a deaf adult, and their mom had brought them to my reading in Fredericksburg, and they had a signer, and then they were front row at the reading at the conversation yesterday, and they were so eager. So I get to know some of the kids. Havana, who's a follower of mine on Twitter, was in the audience, and I hadn't met her and her mom, Bethany, until yesterday, but we had conversed on Twitter. So a lot of fans that I kind of know through social media, like kid fans and their parents, and then a lot of new fans who've been reading my work in their classrooms over the years.
Next call for Jacqueline Woodson comes from Vita in Arlington, Texas. Hi, Vita.
Hi, Pete. How are you?
I'm good.
Good. Miss Woodson, I am the founder and president of a youth organization for young girls. We mentor and sponsor them starting in the 9th grade through the 12th grade. And one of the things that we do with them is look for literature for them to read. So for a 15-year-old, what do you think a 15-year-old, most of our kids are inner city achievers, would get out of reading Brown Girl Dreaming?
So you're asking what a 15-year-old would get out of reading Brown Girl Dreaming? I'm sorry, I wasn't quite
That's
sure.
what I got from it.
Okay.
Yes.
What are your girls reading now?
The book that I gave them at the end of our Stage 1 season, which was the completion of their freshman year in high school, was called Wrong Shoulders. And that was by a young author who happens to be a relative of mine, who wrote what it would be or what her experience was like when she entered high school. So she published that book last year in 2017. So that was the book that was given to them at the end of their freshman year. So now they're starting their sophomore year, and I'm looking for literature to present to them for this for Stage 2 of our program.
What kind of readers are they?
They read various types of literature. The achievers that are in the program are highly focused on academics. They're constantly reading, and so they read all different type of literature. But I have never read any of your books, and I just happened to be strolling through and stopped on Pete's show and was interested in what was being said. So I went online and looked up Black Girls Dreaming just to get an intro and to what the book was all about, and just wanted to get your opinion on would this be a good read for them, or can you recommend something else?
Well, I think the best thing to do would be for you to read Brown Girl Dreaming first. You know the young people much better than I know them, so you know what kind of stuff they're reading and what they're engaged in. And I think if the book speaks to you, you'll be able to speak to them more clearly about it. I think if they're young adults, you might also want to look at something like If You Come Softly or Hush, some book where the young people in the book are a little closer in age to the achievers. But I think it's always good to just familiarize yourself with so much of the literature that's out there for that age group. I bet they know The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, any of the books by Kwame Alexander, Sharon Draper, Jason Reynolds. There's so many great books being published these days by writers of color, by women of color, by African American women. And I think if you want to start, all of my books, all of the writers I mentioned, all of their books are at the public library, which I am a huge fan of public libraries. All of the books are available as audio books, so that if you're driving a lot and you don't have time to read a book, Brown Girl Dreaming, I read the audiobook so they could actually hear it the way I intended for it to sound. Harbor Me is another one. With Harbor Me, my daughter has a role in the book. At the end of the book, my son and I have a conversation about the book. So listening to the audiobook will give you a sense of kind of what the book is, and in it you'll probably be able to hear if it's something that your young people would like. But I think it's really important to make them aware of all of these great authors who are getting published and doing great stuff in the world of young people's literature.
In Brown Girl Dreaming, you say that Odella was destined for great things.
Uh-huh.
Who's
Yes.
Odella?
Odella is my older sister who was very high achieving, and always teachers wanted to skip her. She was always reading years and years above her reading level or her grade level, and just had accolades poured upon her from the time she was very young, and was, and it still is a brilliant person. So she got a lot of attention for her academics as a young person.
And what is she doing now?
She's so funny. She went to law school. She became a lawyer. She practiced law for a bunch of years, and then she retired early and does a lot of yoga and lives an amazing life. She's like, basically, life is short, and I'm going to do what I love. So she makes me very proud.
And who's Hope?
Hope is my older brother, and he is he was named after my grandfather, and Hope Austin Woodson. And he was also a really, really smart kid. So I was the third kid of these two very brainy, kind of nerdy siblings. And Hope went to Brooklyn Tech, which is the kind of smart school, one of the smart schools in New York City, and then went on to college and got a couple of degrees in medical stuff and worked doing medicine. Not medicine, as a medical secretary, and now lives in Youngstown, Ohio with his wife and kids.
And Roman.
And Roman is my youngest brother, and he dealt with lead poisoning a lot as a kid. And he was always this tiny, tiny kid. He was undersized, and now he's 6'3", and works in the Bronx, as helping kids get back on their feet, basically. I wish I was more articulate about the work he does because it's really, really great work. And basically kids who are coming out of the homeless shelters or are heading into the homeless shelters, they build houses together that the young people, that eventually become the homes of the young people. So it's kind of settlement housing stuff, but it's also education. It's also finding them jobs and getting them into the world in a solid way.
Well, maybe we can help Vita a little bit. We'll go through a little bit of Brown Girl Dreaming, and one of the lines in there is, "In my head, it's as real as anything," when it comes to storytelling.
Yes. So as a kid, I got in trouble for lying a lot. And Brown Girl Dreaming talks about me getting in trouble, but this idea that, it wasn't a lie, it was happening. Like, these stories were alive and living in my head. And, one parent called it storytelling, the other parent called lying. It eventually became storytelling. And the book is written in free verse, and then throughout it, there are these how to listen poems, like even the silence has a story to tell you. Just listen, listen. And those are haiku that are basically lessons in how to be a writer.
And you learned haiku at a young age.
I did. It was one of the first forms of poetry. I think a lot of young people learn it. It's one of the most accessible forms. When you think 5-7-5 is a very simple rule to follow. It can be about nature, but it doesn't have to be. So there's an access to it.
Well, Jacqueline Woodson, speaking of rule, or you kind of have a theme in the way you develop your stories. Boom, backstory. Am I being fair to you when I say that?
Let me think.
There's a little bit of a flash, and then here's what happens.
Yeah. I know. It's funny because when I'm thinking of If You Come Softly, in my head, the first line is Jeremiah was black. He could feel it, the way the sun rose over his skin. Sometimes it felt like he sweated black beads of oil, blah, 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 blah. But before that, there's Ellie, who wakes up from that dream. I dreamed about Maya, and I forget that that's the opening, and then we go into the backstory. So yes.
Back to Brown Girl Dreaming. Stories are like air to me. Words are my brilliance.
I finally figured that out.
Cassie, Omaha, Nebraska. You're on with author Jacqueline Woodson. Hi.
Hi. Thank you for having me on. I enjoy C-SPAN, and I'm so happy I tuned in today. I have never read any of Jacqueline's books, but I certainly am going to start. I'm involved in the reading program for Native American children between the ages of 4 and 10. And your book, Showway, is one that I'm going to recommend. We have read a book about Harriet Tubman, but my question, do you have any Native American heritage in your family? Because you look like you could be some Native American.
It's a great question. I don't know, and I feel like I know a lot about my family, but so far that I haven't, no one has come forward and said, wait, we found this bloodline. But I don't know if you know about Debbie Reese's blog called American Indians and Children's Books. It's a great blog for finding really, really great books for ages basically 0 to adult, written by Native people and about the Native indigenous experience in this country and about everything. So I think it's a great place to go to find the great books that are mirrors for the young people you're working with.
And you're watching Book TV on C-SPAN 2's In Depth. This year it's been a special fiction edition. And this month, it's young adult author Jacqueline Woodson. Numbers are on the screen. 202 is the area code, 748-8200. For those in the East and Central time zones, 202-748-8201. If you live in the Mountain and Pacific time zones. Now, if you can't get through on the phone lines, we have some social media ways of getting through as well. Facebook and Twitter, @BookTV is our handle. Email, booktv@cspan.org. Next call for Jacqueline Woodson is Barbara in Newark, Delaware. Barbara?
Hi, Jacqueline.
Hi.
Am I on?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I'm from Newark, Delaware. I'm 90 years old. What book do you recommend for my age group? I hear that it's mostly for young people, but your books seem to be so interesting. I think that I could benefit from them too. And your smile is contagious. And I'll hang up and listen to you. And also, do you ever write any books or any information about Jehovah's Witnesses?
Barbara, before you hang up, please tell us about yourself.
Well, I'm 90 years old. I have a birthday next month. Well, this month, the 3rd of September, I'll be 91. And I'm from Knoxville, Tennessee. And I was my grandpop's favorite granddaughter. So when I heard her remark about that, it brought back many memories. And I also have relatives with the last name of Woodson in Baltimore, Maryland. So that is all I have to say.
Can you tell us a little bit about your life between Knoxville and Newark, Delaware in 90 years?
Oh, gosh. Well, we came to Delaware. My mother was a domestic. My father was a laborer. I had 3 brothers. And we settled in Delaware because that's where, well, the most of the work was for my family at that time. And I had graduated from Howard High School. I went to a little school called Number 29 in Delaware. And I went to Morgan State College for a year. And I have 3 children, of which my oldest daughter is a Jehovah's Witness. So I was interested in hearing remarks from Ms. Woodson on that subject.
Thank you for sharing a little of your history with us too, Barbara.
Thank you. Brown Girl Dreaming, because it's a memoir, it probably has the most about my life as a witness in it. And it would probably give you a lot of information about that. But it's also, I think, the book I would recommend because I bet you would see a lot of yourself in it. It starts in the 60s, it goes back to the 50s some, and then spans on through the 70s. So I would suggest Brown Girl Dreaming, and have a great birthday. Congratulations.
What about Showay for her?
Oh, Showay, you're right. Showay would be...
Just because of the
yes.
great-grandmother, great-great-grandmother aspect of that. So.
Good point, Peter. So I agree, Showay.
All right. Miranda, Winchester, Virginia. Hi, Miranda.
Good afternoon. Jacqueline, I was so excited yesterday to be able to attend your session at the National Book Festival. Sitting with all the teachers in the audience and watching all the little kids sitting on the floor but in front of me was amazing. I'd first like to say I was shocked to see how young you are with all the accomplishments and honors and acclaims that you've gotten over the years. My kids have read your books. I'm a middle school teacher. I have some, I think you were the one who said we shouldn't say struggling readers and we shouldn't say reluctant readers. They're just readers who maybe read a little slower than others and appreciate the value of the written word. One book that you really talked about yesterday was The Day You Began. I am trying this year, part of my strategy is to use more picture books. In my instruction, we're working with empathy, we're working with understanding others, and I look forward to using this book in my classroom to show each student that they are unique, they have a voice, and what they have is themselves, and they should be proud of that. So thank you.
Thank you so much, and thanks for being there. Yeah, The Day You Begin, that's right. I was so happy to read it, the whole book. I was a little bit nervous to do that and then decided to do it. But thanks for using my books, and that was kind of a phenomenal day yesterday.
Why were you nervous to read the whole book?
I hadn't read the whole book to an audience that large before. And because the audience was so diverse, there were adults there were very little kids there. The book has more words than something like "This is the rope." I didn't know if people would hang with me. They couldn't see the pictures, so it was basically depending on the way I read it. So I was a little nervous.
So, can little kids stick with you when you're reading?
It depends on, I think if they are able to see the pictures, they can. Usually when they're very, very young, I will read Pecan Pie Baby, or sometimes This is the Rope, but I found the little kids that were there yesterday hung with me.
Do you enjoy speaking to crowds, or would you prefer to be at home in your writing room or on your stoop writing?
I need both. I need the crowds to remember why I'm doing the work I'm doing. And I love engaging with them. I love engaging especially with the young people who are the ones who want to be writers or the ones who are just really avid readers. And I definitely need that me time, that solitude. And I take it very seriously.
So what is your process? When did you start on Harbor Me, which is your most recent? How long did we think about it? How long did we work on it? And then the editing process and all that.
Oh, that's a good question.
Are we talking years? Are we talking months?
We're talking years. With Harbor Me, it probably started a year before I really started writing it. I remember writing parts of Tiago's story.
Why Tiago's?
I think because I grew up with a very close friend who was from Puerto Rico. So I have the whole Puerto Rican family. And one of the things I remember is going to my friend Maria's grandmother's house with my daughter, who at the time was like 4 years old. And Maria's grandmother's like, ¿por qué ella no habla español? Like, why doesn't the child speak Spanish? And I'm like, porque ella es una morena, like, because she's a black girl. And she's like, pero tú hablas español, why do you, and she thought, and later on I said to Maria, I'm like, when did your grandmother stop speaking English? She's like, she never spoke English. You always spoke Spanish to her. And I had forgotten that as a very young person, you know, we had all these monolingual Spanish-speaking adults in our community. And so from a young age, I was speaking Spanish and English. And once I stopped being in that community, I lost so much of my Spanish. But my memory had been of her grandmother as an English speaker. And when I was thinking about Thiago's character, I was thinking about that. Here's a kid who's negotiating the world of New York City with a mom whose English is not that great. And then also the constant speak English thing that was going on, and how ridiculous that was. And my family and I travel abroad a lot. And when we go to other countries, people speak 2 or 3 languages, and we come here and people are being forced to speak one language. All of it seems so ridiculous. So I was creating this character of Tiago who was negotiating that. And then I was thinking about the way people learn differently, you know, the way I had learned differently, the way so many people I know learn differently, and what would it mean to put them all in a room. So all these ideas were in my head, but I didn't know that it was going to become Harbor Me. And finally I started writing, we're in 2018. It was probably around 2016. It was probably around the time that Another Brooklyn came out that I was really starting to take notes and write down themes and parts of Harbor Me. And then I was working on it for a long time, and then started writing The Day You Begin, and then went back to Harbor Me.
Is there real life in some of these characters? I mean, is there a Holly and a Haley out there in your world somewhere?
I think they are.
Are aspects of people?
Yeah, I say Holly and Haley are both Jacqueline Woodson. You know, I think there's a lot of me in both those girls. There's the introspective side, that's more Haley, and there's the outgoing talking a whole lot, jumping all over the place, Holly. I think I probably mind my daughter a little bit when she was younger for the girls too. For Amari, I see a lot of myself in Amari. I see, that kind of like, but why does it have to be this way? Like he's constantly asking this question and being mad about it with good reason. I think in Ashton, again, it's kind of the introspective person who's learning stuff for the first time and like going, oh. And I think for me, having so many young people around me and even things like, what is your preferred gender pronoun, right? He, she, they, and having to learn to say they and get comfortable with it as someone who had been an English major, and having these aha moments, like this is how we respect that body. And I feel like that's Ashton. Ashton is like, oh, wait a minute. But, and then with Esteban, like the idea of loss, like I've known loss in my life, and in him, he's learning loss, and he's also learning what to do with loss, like how to negotiate it and not have it be a complete loss with the translating of his dad's poems. So yeah, I don't tend to consciously use people I know because I never want my characters to be like those people. And also characters are bigger, right, than regular people. But I definitely I take ideas that are things I'm working out and they become part of my character.
The group seems surprised when the white boy Ashton gets bullied.
Yeah. They are, I think it's kind of not on their radar, but it's that point where they're like, he's mine, right? Like, how dare someone do this to someone we care about? And it goes back to empathy, right? Like, we can get on him about his ignorance around race in our small bubble, but no, outside, that's not okay. Like, he's ours. So, and then they create that united front for him.
And Omari gets the talk from his dad.
Yes, his dad takes him out one Saturday. First tells him he can watch as much television as he wants, and Omari's like, okay, something's wrong with this guy, what's going on? And then his dad takes him out and says that he can't play with guns in public like that. And I remember, my brothers, first of all, our parents telling them, don't run in white neighborhoods. So this was in the 70s, like, don't ever run in a white neighborhood. And, that's where, and if you come softly, the father gives Jeremiah the talk. 20 years ago, the talks are kind of, sadly, timeless, right? And Amari's dad is like, no, you can't play with guns. And of course, we think Tamir Rice automatically, but this has been happening for a long, long time. And even with my own son, he's 10 years old, and his friend's parents had asked us if he could go to Prospect Park and take his Nerf gun, and we're like, no, he can't. Like, he can't be a brown boy in a public space with a toy gun. Like, that's just too dangerous, and it's real.
And were these white friends that asked that?
Yeah, who hadn't thought about it because they didn't have to, and I don't think they're bad people, but I think it's something everybody should think about. Like the lack of safety for brown bodies is we're in an emergency state. So for me, having a brown son and a brown daughter, and having this family that is a lot of people of color in it, it's my everyday thinking. And so when I was creating the character of Amari, like, I had to look at it from both sides. Here's the dad, I'm just trying to keep you safe. Here's the son, like, well, this isn't fair, because that's the truth of it.
Does Harbor Me play in Wichita?
Does it play? Would it work in Wichita?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It would definitely. I mean, it would work anywhere where people live. So.
Carl, Hyattsville, Maryland. You're on with author Jacqueline Woodson. Go ahead.
Hello, Miss Woodson, and thank you, Book TV, for taking my call. Miss Woodson, I have not read one of your books. I am retired. When I turn to my Book TV and watch your story, you inspired something inside of me, and I am totally impressed because you gave me the idea of a message. and your story, you are sending a message. And I just wanted to commend you on your award and just let you know, never too old to learn from a young person. And I just want to thank Book TV and the gentleman for hearing my message.
That was Carl in Hyattsville, Maryland. We keep talking about your award. How many awards have you won?
Oh,
and
man.
yes, you know how many.
I don't know.
Yes, you do.
It's over 200 easily.
Yeah.
It's over. I've run
Including
out
the
of wall
Coretta
space.
Scott King Award,
Yeah,
the
twice.
Newbery Award, four times now?
4 Newbery Honors,
Wow.
yes. National Book Award finalist 4 times. Another Brooklyn was a National Book Award finalist.
I knew
many,
you'd
many
know.
state awards. Astrid Lindgren Award, the Swedish Little Nobel, it's called. I don't know how many. It's a lot, but I know a lot of them.
If somebody wants to look you up, where's the best place to find information on you?
Oh, I think
JacquelineWoodson.com?
Yeah, that's not updated. That's my website. You can find a lot of information, but if you just Google Jacqueline Woodson and don't just rely on Wikipedia, because that's not going to give you all your information, but it's out there. If you, Jacqueline Woodson, JacquelineWoodson.com. Penguin Random House has a lot of information on me. Coretta Scott King Awards, ALA, like everywhere. I come up a lot.
Do you like that?
I like when I come up adequately. I like when it's the information is true. I don't like when people make up stuff, because on Wikipedia they could just throw up anything, you know. And I do use Wikipedia for some stuff, but I remember once it had Jacqueline Woodson has 1 younger brother. It's like, no, what happened to my other 2 siblings? So it's not always correct. So I say do your research.
Leah is in Greensboro, North Carolina. Good afternoon to you.
Yes. This is Leah. I want to ask a question.
Yes, ma'am, you're on the air.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, I want to ask a question about me. I am 69 years old, and I didn't get my learning when I was young. My mom won't sit there teaching us how to do work or homework, nothing like that. So now I've been going to school, but it's not like I want to be. I don't know how to read and write. And I've been like that. I remember going to school, going to kindergarten, and I remember when I was in school, I was looking out the window. I don't know why I was looking out the window, but I wasn't paying attention to the teacher. I don't know what was going on. It wasn't nothing going on at home, but I just didn't have my father there. And my mom won't really helping us do our homework. She had 5 kids. I don't remember her sitting at the table trying to help us do our homework. And I've been frustrated ever since I got older. I started to go back to school and I got shamed. I was embarrassed. Because I didn't know how to read and write. But a couple of friends of mine didn't know how to do it. But they went back to school and got their GED. Now I want it. I want it because my children know how to read and write. And my husband, I was married. My husband deceased, is gone. He's deceased now. But he helped my girls do their homework. But I was there, you know, listening at them to see my girls do their homework. They have education, but I don't. So I'm frustrated with this all the time. I be so hurt. I cry because I just want it before I leave this world. And I went back to school. They had found me a tutor. And then they worked with me for a while. I got something. She said, Livia, your memories is coming back on some things, but it's not like I wanted to come back. So I got shame and I quit again at a tutor class. And she said, Leah, you got to keep on doing it. Keep doing it. And I get frustrated. I get frustrated because I don't know. And sometimes I sit there and I worry about myself and I cry. And I talk to God about it. And I still want to get my learning, my reading right. I'm 69. I don't think I will get it no more. But what should I do? I mean, what should I do with that? I mean, why?
Thank you, ma'am.
Can I answer that?
It's all yours.
So first of all, I'm just applauding you for wanting to get your literacy on. I think there are a couple of things you can do. I completely understand the frustration because it's hard, especially as we get older. So if you have access to a public library, there are literacy classes there, and the people there are probably around your age. If there are not literacy classes at your public library, they would be able to tell you where to go to take them or help you find a tutor. While you're at the library, get your library card. And with your library card, don't just take out picture books, books for very young children, or picture books that look like they're for young children, but they're for everybody. Don't be ashamed of anything you want to read. Also, take out audio books. They have books called playaways. These are books that are on cassette. You get the whole thing. You get the cassette, you get the earphones, all of it comes as one book. And you can listen to books, and that will help you remember words. And as you're listening, you're probably going to think of remembering how you spell certain words, and that's going to help your literacy also. But as soon as you can, get to your local library, go talk to the children's librarian first, and they will be really, really helpful. There are lots and lots of people in this country who are learning to read, who don't know how to read yet. You're never too old to learn to read, and you're never too old to have access to books. So get to that library, get your daughters to help you, and you know, don't be ashamed to ask anyone for help because you have a right to read.
Ann's in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. Hi, Ann.
Hello, I'm delighted to have this chance, and I called to say that here's a 90-year-old who has read one of your books. It was Another Brooklyn, and this is a plug for Book TV. The reason I read it was that it was prominently displayed in the large print section, and I had heard your name the week before on C-SPAN that you would be on, so I picked it up, and it's a delightful read, so artful, and I congratulate you. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate you. Thank you.
That was kind of a neat call. A couple of neat calls
great.
there. Do you generate that kind of conversation or back and forth with people? We had Leah in Greensboro, North Carolina, and then Ann in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Robert. I do. I think one of my platforms as national ambassador is to try to have conversations, to get us talking like you and I are doing, not over social media or virtual talking, but actually having these conversations. So I think a lot of people want to have conversations, as we see from the people who are watching and listening. And even at book, you know, when I go to sign or when I'm giving a talk, afterwards we tend to have conversations like this.
And you said it out loud that you were born in 1963.
Mm-hmm.
At this point in your career, 24, 25 books later, a couple hundred awards later, do you limit your exposure out there? You don't have the need necessarily to go out and do this type of thing?
Yeah, I do. I do a lot fewer school visits than I used to. I try to, instead of going from one school to the other, get teachers to bring young people to the public library, because I really want people to use the library, and I want people to meet each other. You know, when you go into school, you're only going to meet those students in one school, but if you bring two schools into a library, then they're going to meet each other, and you're going to be able to talk to more people. And if one school is a private school and one school is a public school, you don't have to choose, you know, between them. And again, they get to meet each other across economics. And I don't do as many kind of going out and speaking to the masses as I used to, because my time is so limited with a teenager and a 10-year-old and books to write and articles to write and other things going on. So I am a lot quieter in that part of my writing life than I used to be.
All right, let's hear from one more call before we take a little bit of a break, but we've got another hour to go, and we'll put the numbers back up in just a few minutes. But here's Sarah in Pattison, Mississippi. Hi, Sarah. It helps if I push the button. Sorry, Sarah, you're on the air now. I apologize.
Yes, thank you. Jacqueline, I'm 73 years old, and I've always been a book person. In fact, when I was growing up in the 50s and early 50s, there were no books featuring people that looked like me, but my mother would buy the little golden books. Every payday, every Friday, she would go to the drugstore and buy a new golden book, put my name in it, and read it to me. And I've always been a reader. I've been in the book field for about the last, 35 years. I worked for independent bookstores. And eventually in 92, I went off on my own, and I bought a little mail truck, and I had a little bookmobile. I'm a native of New Orleans, Louisiana, and of course we had at least 10 housing projects in the city of New Orleans. And I would go into the projects and go to Head Start and different schools and nurseries and read to the children. And of course, I always had your books. I moved to Mississippi in '94. I did try to do a bookstore here, but things didn't work out too well. And I've been ill for the last 2 years, so I haven't been selling very often. But hopefully I can get back into the field. But thank you so much, and I'm so proud of you again. You have a good day.
Sarah, you said that when your mother would go to buy books, there were not books that looked like you. Was that correct?
Sir, I'm sorry. Okay.
What does that mean?
I was born in 1945. Okay, so in the early 50s, and there were hardly any books featuring children. I'm of African descent. I'm African American.
Right.
I'm sorry. But the only children then that was shown in the books back in the day were, of course, Caucasian children. But luckily, my mother did read to me, and I've always been a reader. And in later life, my parents divorced when I was young. But when my father and I reconnected, I didn't realize that my father was a reader. So I guess it was in the genes.
So could you relate to those little white children back in the 50s when you were reading those golden books?
Oh, yes, I could. I'm sure, they had the same experiences that I had. But, it was so rare that you found a children's book, with children of color.
Thank you for your time, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. I know Dr. Carla Hayden talks about the book Bright April, which was the first book she read that had kids of color in it. And that book went out of print, but she just told me yesterday that they're reissuing it. And I had the same problem in the 70s. There were very few books that represented people who look like me. And it's one of the first things I wanted to, it was one of the first reasons I wanted to be a writer as an adult. I was like, I want to fill that hole where people are not seeing themselves. And it was true. We had the books that we had to relate to them because that was all we had, right? So with Judy Blume's Are You There, God Is Me, Margaret, like me and Margaret were both flat-chested, so we're good. And you try to find yourself in those books, and then when you finally saw yourself in a book, you're like, this is what I've been looking for. This is what I was missing. But until before then, you didn't even recognize your own invisibility. So thanks for your work as an independent bookseller and for going into underserved places and bringing story and literacy and literature. And I hope you feel better soon.
And you say that A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, Betty Smith's book, is one of your favorite books.
Yeah, I love A Tree Grows in Brooklyn.
Why?
It's home to me. I feel like it takes place in Williamsburg years and years before I was a child, but I was growing up in Bushwick, so there was this familiarity to it. And also in the characters, I just, there was this kind of longing for me for a different time. They were also struggling. They were so poor at some point. And Franny Nolan was such a reader and such a dreamer, and I just kind of felt like I understood her story deeply. And it was probably the first book I read where the people lived in Brooklyn.
Tell us about Each Kindness.
So Each Kindness is a story of a girl who comes to a new school and is shunned by the other kids. The person telling the story is Chloe, who is the main shunner and who's kind of not a very nice child. And she's telling it in retrospect. That winter, snow fell on everything, turning the world a brilliant white. She's looking back at the winter when she wasn't kind. And the girl eventually ends up moving away, and Chloe realizes she missed this chance of kindness. While all of this is going on, the teacher is obviously aware of it because she brings a bowl of water into the classroom and asks each kid to drop a stone into the water and to reflect the kindness they did. And she said that's what kindness does. It goes out like a ripple into the world. And this girl, Chloe, realizes she can't think of a single kind thing that she's done and just passes the stone on. But it's basically about kindness and the impact of it on everyone.
Well, here's Jacqueline Woodson reading from her book, Each Kindness.
Each Kindness by Jacqueline Woodson, that's me, and it's illustrated by Evie Lewis, who is fabulous. That summer, shucks, I messed up. Okay, I'm starting again. I wrote this book, I know how to read it. That's, one more time. This is like rewriting. I'm rereading until I get it right. That winter, snow fell on everything, turning the world a brilliant white. One morning, as we settled into our classroom, the door opened. I messed up again. One morning, as we settled into our seats, the classroom door opened, and the principal came in. She had a girl with her and said to us, "This is Maya." Maya looked down at the floor. I think I heard a whisper, "Hello." We all stared at her. Her coat was open and the clothes beneath it looked old and ragged. Her shoes were spring shoes, not meant for the snow. A strap on one of them had broken. Our teacher, Miss Albert, said, "Say good morning to the new student." But most of us were silent. The only empty seat was next to me, and that's where our teacher put Maya. And on that first day, Maya turned to me and smiled, but I didn't smile back. I moved my chair, myself, and my books a little further away from her. When she looked my way, I turned to the window and stared out at the snow. And every day after that, when Maya came into the classroom, I looked away and didn't smile back. My best friends that year were Kendra and Sophie. At lunchtime, we walked around the schoolyard, our fingers laced together, whispering secrets into each other's ear. One day, while we were near the slide, Maya came over to us. She held open her hand to show us the shiny jacks and tiny red balls she'd gotten for her birthday. "It's a high bouncer," she said, but none of us wanted to play. So Maya played a game against herself. That afternoon, when we got back into the classroom, Maya whispered to me, "I bet you can't guess who the new Jacks champion of the world is." Behind me, Andrew whispered, "Chloe's got a new friend, Chloe's got a new friend." "She's not my friend," I whispered back. The weeks passed. Every day we whispered about Maya, laughing at her clothes, her shoes, the strange food she brought for lunch. Some days Maya held out her hand to show us what she brought to school, a deck of cards, pick-up sticks, a small tattered doll. Whenever she asked us to play, we just said no. The days grew warmer and warmer. The pond thawed. Grass began growing where snow had once been. One day, Maya came to school wearing a pretty dress and fancy shoes, but the shoes and the dress looked like they belonged to another girl before Maya. "I have a new name for her," Kendra whispered. Never knew. Everything she has came from a second-hand store. We all laughed. Maya stood by the fence. She was holding a jump rope but did not come over to ask us if we wanted to play. After a while, she folded it double, rolled the ends around each hand, and started jumping. She jumped around the whole schoolyard without even stopping. She didn't look up once, just jumped, jumped, jumped. The next day, Maya's seat was empty. In class that morning, we were talking about kindness. Miss Alpert had brought a big bowl into the class and filled it with water. We all gathered around her desk and watched her drop a small stone into it. Tiny waves rippled out, away from the stone. This is what kindness does, Miss Alpert said. Everything, each little thing we do goes out like a ripple into the world. Then Miss Alpert let us each drop the stone in as we told her what kind things we had done. Joseph had held the door for his grandmother. Kendra helped change her baby brother's diaper. Even mean old Andrew had done something. I carried teacher's books up the chair, he said, and Miss Alpert said it was true. I stood there holding Miss Alpert's rock in my hand, silent. Even small things count, Miss Alpert said gently. But I couldn't think of anything and passed the stone on. Maya didn't come to school the next day or the day after that. Each morning I walked to school slowly, hoping this would be the day Maya returned, and she'd look at me and smile. I promised myself this would be the day. I smiled back. Each kindness, Miss Alpert had said, makes the whole world a little bit better. But Maya's seat remained empty. And one day, Miss Alpert announced to the class that Maya wouldn't be coming back. Her family had to move away, Miss Alpert said. Then she told us to take out our notebooks. It was time for spelling. That afternoon, I walked home alone. When I reached the pond, my throat filled with all the things I wished I would have said to Maya, each kindness I had never shown. I threw small stones into it, over and over, watching the way the water rippled out and away, out and away. Like each kindness done and not done, like every girl somewhere holding a small gift out to someone, and that someone turning away from it. I watched the water ripple as the sun set through the maples, and the chance of a kindness with Maya became more and more forever gone.
202 is the area code, 748-8200 if you live in the East and Central time zones and want to have a chance to talk with author Jacqueline Woodson, 202-748-8201 for those of you in the Mountain and Pacific time zones. We also have social media ways of getting a hold of us, at BookTV on Facebook, at BookTV on Twitter, and booktv@cspan.org on email. Next call for Jacqueline Woodson comes from Denise in Dayton, Ohio. Denise, thanks for holding. You're on the air.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you, C-SPAN. Through the years of watching C-SPAN, every genre, so many resources I've gotten through the years for my own personal and for my classroom. And I want to say, Jacqueline, this is the first time I ever called in through all the years. You are amazing. I have not read all of your books, but each year when I had my own homeroom and now that I have all of the students for computer science, we start out the school year with each kindness. Okay. By the time we get to the point that it's done, kindness done and undone, you should see their eyes. It is so phenomenal. I wanted that book, and I bought one, and then another parent bought the book for me. I'm sorry, my phone went off.
It's okay.
Bought it for me, and we use it every year. It is so phenomenal. You can hear nothing. It relates to kids so much. It's such a great way to start out the school year, to set the tone. I love that book. I'm going to read more of it. I have so much to read, but I'm going to read more of your books. But I'm just curious. I had the phone down. Did you talk about how that got started? Because the kids can relate to those characters.
And before we get an answer, Denise, you said you're a middle school teacher?
I actually teach K through 6 now, but we did have middle school, so K through 8.
Okay.
Computer science, but I've always taught Montessori for a public school, and I am in an urban public school. I grew up in Philadelphia, but I teach in Dayton. We're military, retired.
Is there a Chloe in every classroom?
Oh, my goodness. There's a Chloe in every school, regardless of where you're at. Yeah, there's a Chloe and a Maya. Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Thanks so much for calling and for using each kindness. And for being a Buckeye now. It's an interesting story. So when my daughter was in 2nd grade, I was being the mom in her classroom, and this one girl who I adored came in, and she had on these really cool pants, and I was like, those are really cool pants. And another kid who hadn't heard me, when she saw the girl in the pants, she's like, oh, I can't believe you even wore those to school. And for the rest of the day, you saw the young girl who had the pants. She would try to sit at her desk. When she got up, she tied the jacket around her lap and around her waist. And you knew that her day was ruined, basically. And the thing she wanted to do most was get home and take off those pants and never wear them again. And the girl who said it had no clue that she had ruined this child's day. And so it inspired me to start writing each kindness. And I wanted to write a story about a girl who had not been kind. And I kept trying to figure out when someone had not been kind to me to write that book. And all that kept coming up is instances in my own childhood when I had not been kind. And as around the time I was writing it, my mom died suddenly. And it kind of clicked that we have this idea that tomorrow we're always going to have a chance to do the right thing. Especially young people, they just believe tomorrow's always going to come. And for me, it was this kind of moment of like, wow, what if my character does not get a chance to be kind? Because when I first started writing it, I thought in the end she would have a chance at kindness. And the book became about the regret and the seize the day, the fact that do it today because we know not what's coming tomorrow. And in it, the whole ripple effect came to me. I was literally sitting at the lake throwing stones in the water and thinking about this book and watching those ripples, and it's like, this is it. So I think books come to me all kinds of ways, but that one had a very interesting journey.
Email from Gary. Perhaps you might consider adult dyslexia contributing to adult reader challenges. Going back to Leah in Greensboro.
I think adult dyslexia is real, as is childhood reading differences. But if we're thinking about Leah and her frustration, I think even with learning differences, you learn to read differently. You can learn to read differently, and it takes time, and it takes care, and it takes someone who knows what they're doing. And I think one thing that frustrates people a lot is their lack of access to literature, their lack of being able to get a book and open it up and read it. And I do want to stress for people that you can listen to a book and it's okay, and you're getting story, and you're getting comprehension, and you're getting sentence structure, and you're getting all of these things, and you can listen to a book and look at the book as you're listening to it as a way of gaining access. I'm not a reading specialist, but I do want all people to have access to literature, and until the code of reading gets cracked in whatever way it needs to get cracked, there are other ways to access good books, and I think everyone should have that kind of access.
Dennis, Pasadena, California. Hi, Dennis. You're on with author Jacqueline Woodson.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. So I immediately saw your last name. We share the same last name. I was wondering if you have done any research on your family history, on the where your name came from, where your family got that name. I grew up here in Pasadena. I was born actually in Mexico, but I had an aunt that was a teacher in San Diego, California, and after she retired, she started doing the family history, and so that family history has been so important to the rest of the family. And I'm wondering if you've done any family history on your name, where your family came from, and have you written anything about the family history?
Yes, all the family history is written about in Brown Girl Dreaming, all the way back to Sally Hemings. So the Woodson clan is not a huge clan, so I'm sure we're connected somehow. But my aunt is a genealogist in Ohio, and she's done lots of research on the Woodson name.
The Woodsons are doctors, lawyers, teachers, as you say in Brown Girl Dreaming.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What about your mother's side of the family?
My grandmother taught for a little while, just to like a community kind of teaching thing, and she was primarily domestic, did domestic work. My grandfather was a foreman in a printing factory, and then there are others that have various jobs that I don't know, but they all, I have a bunch of cousins who are still in Greenville. I'm not sure what they do, but the Woodson side is definitely the side that was earliest educated and for the longest period of time.
Can you still smell your grandfather's cigarettes?
I can.
He died very early.
He did, and he smoked Pall Mall. He smoked, I think it was Pall Mall, they were unfiltered. And I still know what they look like. And I still remember the relatives who snuffed. They would put that stuff under their lips, and then they have a can to spit in. It was tobacco, I guess. But yeah, I think the thing I remember most about my grandfather is his hands. He had these really strong hands and because he was always working the land or chiseling or doing something with his hands. And I think that kind of part nervous energy, part gift, was this desire to always be working somehow.
There's a chapter in Brown Girl Dreaming called The Fabric Store.
Mm-hmm.
At the fabric store, we were just customers.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so my grandmother sewed, and I still sew. I still love going to fabric stores. But that passage is about going to all these places we went to in Greenville that were still segregated, and how they would, my grandmother didn't want to go there because they didn't treat Black people right. But at the fabric store, she and the woman were friends and bonded and talked about fabric and talked about the family. And my grandmother felt like that was a place she could go and feel safe and want to give her money to because she was respected there.
What was it like to write your memoir, to write the autobiographical book after years and many, many, fictionalized YA titles?
It was a relief. It was definitely,
It was a relief?
It was a relief. It was a relief to write something I knew, to go back and figure out what I knew. But to know that it was true, right? And to revisit the ancestors, to go back and remember my grandfather and my grandmother and my uncle and my mom who died. And to go back to South Carolina and, visit the cousins and ask them questions and to look at old documents and to talk to my aunt and to just to mine the history of generations, really. But, and also, I started writing it because I was trying to figure out how I got to be a writer, how I got to this point of telling all these stories and getting all of these awards and getting all of this attention. That didn't come from nowhere. I didn't just wake up one day and say, I'm Jacqueline Woodson, author. I'm standing on the shoulders of generations of people all the way back to a history of people who weren't allowed to learn to read and write. And to go from there to here was amazing to me. And each time I wrote something new or discovered something new about my family, it was like, whoa, we are amazing. So it was a good thing.
Jay Leith, Columbia, South Carolina. Good afternoon. Jay Leith, you with us?
Huh?
Jay Leith, are you with us?
Yeah.
How old are you, Jay Leith?
9.
Have you read a Jacqueline Woodson book?
Sadly, no.
Sadly, no. Okay. Has your mom read a Jacqueline Woodson book?
Yes.
Okay. What would you like to ask Ms. Woodson? We'll put Ms. Jackie on the air, okay? We'll put her on the screen. And you can go ahead and ask her any question you'd like.
Okay. My question is, what advice can you give to young readers and those who want to become writers?
That's a good question, Jaylee. So what are you reading now?
What you reading? What are you reading?
Book diary.
What's that book you're reading, Jaylee?
Book diaries.
Something diaries?
Oh, Dork Diary. Dork Diaries. Oh, okay. I know Dork Diaries. So do you like writing graphic novels, or do you like writing poetry, or do you like writing stories? What kind of stuff do you like writing?
Graphic novels.
Oh, good. So you're on the right track, right? The way to be a writer is by reading, right? So read as much stuff as you can. Because you want to write graphic novels, read Dork Diaries, read, other graphic novels that you love. There are all kinds of graphic novels. There are nonfiction. All kind of graphic books. They're nonfiction. They're fiction. There are ones about poems. So just read as much as you can and write. Try to write something, or write and draw every day if you can, or as often as you can. And when you can't write or draw, read. Keep reading and read slowly, so you can study how the authors are doing what they're doing, so you can learn from them. Do you have a library card?
Yes.
Do you use it?
Yes.
Okay, and do you talk to your librarian about what other books you can read to become a writer?
No.
Okay, next time you're at your library, ask her. Tell her that Jacqueline Woodson asked you to ask her some of the books that she would suggest because you want to be a writer, okay?
Okay.
And Jacqueline Woodson, what's a book of yours that you would recommend for Jaylee to pick up at the library?
I would say, Jaylee, you should look at my picture books, because you draw and you write, and those will also help you learn about writing. So why don't you start with The Day You Begin? You can get it at your library. And also Pecan Pie Baby might be a good one. Or ask your librarian which of the Jacqueline Woodson books would be good for you, the picture books, to help you learn more about drawing and writing, okay?
All right, Jaylee, we're going to hang up now, okay? And really appreciate your calling in. Good to hear your voice. Robert, Atlanta, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. I love the way you handled that last call. Thank you. Question, Ms. Woodson. I run a boys club in West Atlanta. Can you folks hear me?
Yeah, we're listening, Robert.
Okay. I guess I see you as an opinion leader as well as an author. There seems to be a terrible disconnect between what we see and some of the things I hear you saying. One window on that would have been Jasper Williams' eulogy for Aretha Franklin. I think it was yesterday. I wonder if you might have heard that.
No, it was the day before, I thought, but I had to leave. I had to stop watching before the eulogy, sadly. I saw a lot of it, though.
In our world, these children they're in terrible danger, but they're much safer in white neighborhoods than they are in their own neighborhoods. And the people who help them the most, who are the most effective youth workers and social workers, are actually the police. But you don't hear this. And I'm wondering what kind of angle you have on that, or what.
Say that.
What sort of insight you might have.
Can you repeat the question, because you went out a little bit and I wasn't sure I heard it right.
Sorry. In our world, youth work in a place like West Atlanta, which is kind of tough. The most effective youth workers or social workers are the police, who really do care. the neighborhoods in which they're most safe are the white neighborhoods rather than their own neighborhoods.
The police or the people? The police or the youth are more safe?
The youth are more safe in the white neighborhoods. The police are the best social workers, according to Robert.
Is that the question?
And youth workers. The best youth organization in West Atlanta is PAL, the Police Athletic League. No question about that. And
now, Robert, are you a policeman?
No, I'm a youth worker. I work for a boys' club.
Okay. Are you white?
I am.
Okay. Thanks. Let's get a response to. And you say there's a disconnect between what Jacqueline Woodson is saying and what you're seeing on the ground.
I think so, but I'm not sure. That's what I wanted to ask her about.
So in terms of you're saying the white kids are more safe in the white neighborhoods, or the black kids?
The black kids are more safe in the white neighborhoods.
In the white neighborhoods.
Than they are in their own neighborhoods.
Is that the opinion of the black kids, or is that your opinion?
I think both.
I think the thing about it is I'm kind of boots on the ground with a lot of people of color in lots and lots of states, and aside from what we're seeing, I think police athletic leagues are doing amazing work. My son plays baseball for the Police Athletic League. I think the Boys Club do amazing work. And I think there are a lot of organizations, youth working organizations, that are trying to do the work. I think the disconnect is the conversation between black and white. And really having that conversation with the parents of these young people, with the young people themselves, letting white kids and black kids have conversations together. All American Boys by Jason Reynolds and Brendan Kiley is a book about that conversation. And one thing that they were doing is going around the country. Brendan is white, Jason is black, and having this conversation with young white and black kids. And it was really interesting for so many adults to hear what both white kids and black kids were saying about the state of our country right now and their own sense of safety. Because what we see in the media in terms of so many black kids getting pummeled or shot or are feeling unsafe around cops, there's something going on, because these stories aren't getting made up. In terms of white neighborhoods being more safe for black children, I don't know. I mean, I think if you're working with young people of color, I think it's worth it to have these conversations that are sometimes hard to have, because young people speak the truth. And I think you will get a better sense of who you're dealing with. I think also it's really important to read the literature they're reading and have conversations with them around that. See the movies they're seeing and have conversations with them around that. I just watched David Diggs' movie, and Raphael, I'm not going to think of the name of it, but it's a brilliant movie. And listen to some young boys talk about that. But I think thank you for the work you're doing. I really, really appreciate it. I really appreciate anyone who cares enough about young people to work with them. And I think it's really important that you have a really true sense of the lives of those young people and what they're dealing with every day, because it's a very complicated situation.
Let's hear from Wells in Oceanside, California. You're on the air.
Yeah. Hello there, Jacqueline. How you doing?
Good. Hi, Wells.
Well, I'd just like to talk to you anyway. I'm 80 years of age, and I haven't read any of your books or anything like that, but I appreciate what you're doing, try to help the young folks. But what I want to say is that I only had a 6th grade education. And Thurgood Marshall mother taught me in the 1st grade down in Baltimore, Public School 140. And through the years, I did a lot of reading, and it helped me a lot. I had 4 years in the Air Force and 20 years in the federal government, so that's 30 years of service that I had to render, to my nation. And I appreciate very much what you're doing, and maybe I'll go to the library and get one of your books. But reading is very good, and that's how made my life and everything by reading a lot. but not having a lot of education. So I always said that you got 90% common sense and 10% book work. So what it is that I had the 90% common sense and a 10% book work. So I appreciate everything what you're doing, because down in my area where we came from, in Baltimore, that when I seen that movie about Thurgood, well, it didn't tell the true story about him, because they never did tell the story about when he worked on a railroad trying to get money to, work his way through college before he went to College Park and all that stuff. So if you ever get a chance to write a book, try to write a book about the true story of Thurgood Marshall. See, his mother, she the first one to smack me side of her hand with a ruler when I was in the first grade. She was a hell of a good teacher, but that's I appreciate, that you're on television, and I wish you all well. Okay, dear?
Thank you.
Thank you, Wells.
So, Wells, I think the movie, of course, movies are different from books. So I think the Thurgood book tells more of the true story, more of the full story. I think the movies are, they're going to give us some of the information. Mainly they want to entertain us. But if you want to get a deeper understanding, is this working?
It is. I think your microphone might have fallen off. If you can get it back on.
If you want
Otherwise, we'll have somebody come in and do that for you.
Thank you.
So you go ahead and keep talking, though. They can pick up.
So if you want to get a deeper understanding of Thurgood, you might want to go to your library and ask about a book. And I know you said you had a 6th grade education. It might be, again, let's go to audiobooks if the book seems too complicated to read right now, or if you don't have a lot of time. You might want to take a listen to the audiobook to get that really true. And you probably see your teacher in it, too. I'm sure the book is going to give you much more information about Judge Thurgood Marshall's backstory.
Well, Jacqueline Woodson, we've had a slew of older people calling in to talk to you. Do you get this at a book signing or at a fair? Well?
At book signings, I really do get the spectrum. Everyone from very little kids like Jay to 90-year-olds. So I don't get as much older people because they're not mobile like that, so they can't come to the event, which makes books this so good. So I do get a range of ages.
Another Brooklyn. Gigi's mother, I hope I'm getting the right girl here. Was it drugs or mental illness?
So Gigi's mom, Angela's mom.
Angela's mom. Okay, sorry.
It was drugs. Yeah.
Was it part of the crack epidemic that happened in the 80s?
No, it was the heroin of the 70s. So that you look at the period, you can trace the drug. So she was a heroin addict. And OD'd and was found on the roof.
Dorothy's in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Hi, Dorothy.
Hi.
You're on the air, ma'am.
Thank you. I wanted to call about another caller, the 90-year-old woman who could not read.
Well, that was the 69-year-old Leah who could not read.
No, the 90-year-old woman who could not read.
Okay.
And I think your advice was spot on. She needs to keep doing it. She needs not to quit. And I also love the advice about the audiobooks. I hadn't thought about that. I'm an adult education teacher, preparing people for the GED. Most of them are in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. They are not strong readers because they just haven't had the kind of education that prepares them for that. But you've given me some great ideas. And I haven't read your books. I know you hear that a lot today.
I think I haven't heard that as much as I've heard it on this show. I'm like kind of blown away by how many. I don't think anyone needs to say anymore they haven't read my book. I'm good with that. Because on the show, 90% of the people have not read my books, and it's starting to feel like a lot. But all you have to say is, I'm looking forward to reading you, or something like that. It was the 69-year-old woman who couldn't read. The 90-year-old woman was a reader, but I so appreciate your work.
So, hearing that, you're getting a new audience here, or does it start to affect you after a while?
It's so funny because I'm just like, it's just interesting.
You've sold what, millions?
I don't know. I've sold a lot of books.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah.
Bestsellers, most.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of bestsellers on the list,
Right.
but not for this audience. So, it's funny. I mean, I'm grateful. I'm so grateful to C-SPAN, and I'm so grateful to be talking to you, Peter, and I'm so grateful to be meeting these people who haven't read me, because it's I think I live in the bubble that everyone has read me, and it's good to know that that's a bubble.
Well, you can tell how popular an author is by how big his or her name is on the title, and you are now as big as the title, if not 3 times as big as the title. Sometimes you got to search for the actual name of the book when you see your books. We have not talked about Hush.
Oh.
Where did that come from? Where did the idea come from? I don't want to give it all away, but.
So Hush is the story of a family that ends up an African-American family that ends up going into the witness protection program after something happens.
And the father is a policeman.
Yeah, the father is a cop, and he witnesses something, and he decides to go against the force to break the blue wall of silence, and as a result, they end up having to go into the witness protection program. The girls are 13 and 15. They end up having to completely change their identity. And I think when I started writing it, it was basically because I was fascinated by the witness protection program. And the stories I had read, the kids were usually very young. And so I asked myself, what would happen if someone had to go into the witness protection program as a teenager who had lived most of their life as one person and then suddenly had to become another person. And I created Taswia and Cameron, who are the girls in the story, and began to tell the story. And it was interesting because it kind of became a story about identity politics, right? If someone takes our name away, who do we become? And I had to imagine myself of waking up and no longer being Jacqueline Woodson. Like, who would I be? What would I say about my history, where I came from, what I've done before? And it was interesting to try to develop that into a narrative.
Did you know where that book was going to end when you started it?
No, I had no idea. And it took a lot of rewrites to get to that ending. And the answer to the question I was asking became that they had not lost everything. I think they had talked so much about having lost everything, and that they had the 4 of each other. They had them each other. They were still okay.
Jacqueline Woodson, where'd you go to college?
I went to a small college in Long Island. I don't know if I want to name it because I don't want to encourage people to go there.
Did not have a good experience necessarily.
It was fine. It was fine. Everything I did, everything led up to this moment. So it was a Delphi University. If I hadn't gone to Delphi, I probably wouldn't be sitting here now. But if I had to do it again, I think I would have done it differently. I went there, I had an academic scholarship. I eventually had a partial track scholarship, so it was where I could afford to go. Other schools that accepted me didn't give me any money, and I would not have been able to go to college without any money. And they just recently gave me an honorary degree, so I'm grateful to them. But at the time I was there, it was very hard for me to be there as a kid of color, as a kid with not much money, as a kid who just was trying to figure out who I was. I think I needed probably a different kind of, I probably would have gone to an HBCU. I think I would have thrived there in some other kind of way.
But you were there on a track scholarship and
I was just there
scholastic?
on an academic scholarship. It was later on when I was a walk-on on the track team, and then got a scholarship. I got money from the track team because I was a good runner.
Where do you think you learned writing?
I think I learned...
Or was it here?
Yeah, I think it's always been with me. I think storytelling was always with me, and I really, I just I didn't have a backup plan. Like writing was the thing I was saying I was going to do from a really young age, and it brought me such joy. And I couldn't. I just did it all the time. I was writing poems. I was writing short stories. I was writing plays. But writing was kind of my go-to. It was the thing that felt like it anchored me in the world, and still does. But I took classes. I took classes. I took creative writing classes at Adelphi. I took classes at the New School. I took classes in Iowa. Whenever there was a writer that I wanted to work with, I still to this day. I mean, I would take the class if it was a writer who I really respected.
The Iowa Writers Workshop?
They have a summer program. I didn't do their MFA
Have
program.
you led that yet?
Have I led it? I don't teach. No,
That's a bad idea, is it?
Oh, teaching. I used to teach. I was one of the founding faculty for the Vermont College Writing for Children program, and since then, we've gotten a lot of writers out of there. I taught at Goddard. I taught at City College. I'm starting a foundation to harbor artists and composers and visual artists. I'm not going to be teaching, but I'm going to be figuring out the space for them. But yeah, teaching is the thing that I can't do. So I have such a deep respect for teachers.
Next call for Jacqueline Woodson comes from Arnold in Dallas, Texas. Hi, Arnold.
How you doing? I appreciate you guys taking my call. I had a totally different question, but I was very impressed with Jacqueline in the manner in which she responded to that individual who said that black kids are more safer in white neighborhoods. I mean, I get kind of irked with people not having walked in our color, having an opinion about black lives, and I appreciate the manner in which Jacqueline responded to his question. I like black authors. I don't have any other books. I'm 69 years old. I'm from that old school, and my first book was what was it? Angela Y. Davis, If They Come in the Morning, and Eldridge Cleaver's Soul on Ice. So to tell you what the mind frame that my reading is all about. But I appreciate Jacqueline. I'm going to start researching her books and probably go out and get some of her books because I don't have any of it. But that's all I wanted to say. I appreciate you guys' program.
Thanks so much, and thanks for calling.
Well, let's see if Kay in Salt Lake City has read any of your books. Hi, Kay.
Hi. I have to say I haven't, but I am a C-SPAN junkie, and I happened on this program, and I'm delighted that I've been able to hear this. I don't know where in the world she gets her wonderful ideas, but I wish I had that kind of imagination. My question is really a little off track. I've been very I'm another old lady. I'm 85 years old. But my question is if I'm being politically incorrect, because all of my life I have thought if I said someone is articulate, that is a compliment. And I've been hearing lately that that's definitely a slur to an African American person. I have a biracial granddaughter whom I love, and she's getting her doctorate, and to me she's very articulate, and I am embarrassed that word has a different meaning, and I guess I'm wondering if there are other words that we are supposed to avoid in order to be politically correct.
So I have to say first and foremost that I appreciate at 85 you're doing the work and trying to do the right thing. I think it's hard. I think it's hard to change our language. It's hard to change the way we think about the language we use. And I think the issue with the word articulate to describe a person of color is the assumption is that we're not supposed to be, right? It's assumed that we're not, right? That we can't speak well, that we don't have manners, and all of this information that comes with that word. So I think it maybe a long time ago it would have been okay, but it is a word that makes people feel like, well, did you not expect me to be articulate? Do you not expect me to know how to read? Do you not expect me to be able to write or be president or whatever it is? And so that's why it gets problematic. And yeah, it's a great word but I think it's good to just assume that people are articulate unless they prove otherwise, and think of other great things about them. I mean, I don't mind people calling me brilliant. I don't mind people calling me a genius. I don't mind people, saying stuff like that. That doesn't feel like a surprise, that they're surprised I am so. But when someone says, oh, you're so articulate, it's like, duh. Or your English is so good, it's like, it's my first language, right? So just in terms of that, yeah, that is a word that can get problematic. There's a great online paper called The Root. And it's it's basically, we used to have Jet Magazine, Ebony Magazine, all these places that had news about the African American experience. TheRoot.com, it's a paper that an online journal that you could subscribe to, and it gives you a lot of information about the Black experience. So that's one of the many places that you can learn about why language is offensive and just get a sense. And I'm sure your granddaughter probably already knows about it. But it's helpful in figuring out the right way to be in this point in time.
Heather Williams, tweet. Hi, I'm an elementary librarian at Edwidge Elementary in Marysville, Ohio. I love your books and start out the school year with Each Kindness. I have a book club for 3rd and 4th graders. What books of yours would you recommend using for the club? And what books should we add to our library?
Thanks for your questions. Well, you should definitely add Harbor Me and The Day You Begin to your library. You do Each Kindness already. So for the 3rd and 4th graders, I would try Showway. It's a lot of information in that book. It's a picture book that's targeted probably at older young people, but it goes from the period of enslavement to present day, and it's kind of a history of how I became a writer. It's kind of a younger version of Brown Girl Dreaming, but depending on where they're at with their reading, I bet they'd get a lot out of it.
Susan's in Redding, California. Susan, please go ahead with your question or comment.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. Because of a couple of callers, I wanted to ask a question and have a comment too. Been in an upper middle class neighborhood, was raised in that, and then because of economic circumstances, I ended up in poor white neighborhoods. Trying to and I was listening to the comment about the crime differences. I didn't see a difference in the crime between whites and African and Black neighborhoods, except for the fact that I saw the law enforcement take more concern in the white neighborhoods than in the Black. They treated them differently, the Black neighborhoods versus the white neighborhoods. They were softer on the white neighborhoods with the same crime than they were in the Black neighborhoods. And I just wonder, I wonder if both the media is partially to blame for that because of the way they portray both whites and blacks with the same crime. And also, I wondered if the schools could possibly, if helping to have invest in books to introduce to all our kids to educate them would help. That was my question, and the media thing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. I think Peter and I talked about this earlier about what Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop said about books being mirrors and windows. And I do think that it's important that people, especially young people, get a sense of who other people are. And books can do that. They can read books where the people in the books don't look like they do or don't live like they do. don't have the same belief system as they do, and learn, not only have a new experience, but also begin to learn empathy. And I think that's the thing that changes the narrative, is empathy and understanding each other.
Who's Jesmyn Ward?
Jesmyn Ward is someone I'd take a class from if she was teaching. She's talk about genius. The book that I have read of hers a number of times is Sing Unburied Sing, which won the National Book Award the year I chaired the fiction committee. And she lives in Mississippi. She's the only writer that's won the National Book Award twice. And just a really thoughtful and beautiful book.
What's it about?
It's kind of like a family saga. It's about JoJo's a young boy coming of age in a family where his mom is addicted to drugs, his grandmother is dying, and his grandfather is his rock. His father's about to get out of prison. He's biracial, and his mother and a friend drive him and his sister to get the father out of prison. He's at, and it's about that journey. It's about discovery. It's about family. It's about parchment, which is still in existence, crazily enough. It's about ghosts. I don't know how she does it, but it's about a book that takes you to another place, sits you down, picks you up, brings you back home different.
Both Haley in Harbor Me and this book, Visiting Day, are about visiting in prison.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that come from?
So when I was growing up, my uncle was incarcerated, and once a month we'd go up to upstate New York and visit him in prison. And it was this celebration because we got to be reunited with him for that one day. And so when I was growing up, there were no books about people who were incarcerated, even though, we have this prison industrial complex here, and we have mass incarceration, and we have school to prison pipeline, and we have all these kids who have lost their parents to incarceration, and they have no mirrors, and I didn't, and so I thought I was the only kid who had a family member who was incarcerated, and there was a shame to that, which was ridiculous. And so when I grew up, I wrote Visiting Day about a girl who visits her dad in prison, to pay homage to my uncle, to pay homage to my reality as a child, and to show that this is another way we have family, and there shouldn't be a shame to it. As a child, you've done nothing wrong. Like, the thing that you might do wrong is to stop loving that person, but I wanted to show what a day going to visit someone who was incarcerated looked like, and also the longing to be reunited without bars between them.
Dear Haley, I'm sorry I didn't show up last time. I will never not show up for you again, not while I'm here inside, not when I'm on the outside again. ... Love, your father.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's the letter Haley's dad writes to her after Haley and her uncle drive 7 hours to visit him at a prison called Malone, upstate New York. And he's depressed that day, and he can't come down to visit with them. And so they wait and wait, and he doesn't show up. And then they drive the 7 hours back home, and she's devastated. And her uncle, who's this really good guy, explains to her that he's human, and this is what comes with humanity. And she's like, no, you can't do that. You can't not show up. And it goes on to eventually him writing that letter.
ARTT.
A Room to Talk. And that's the art room where their teacher, Miss Laverne, the teacher of the 6 kids in Haley's class, the 6 of them get taken so that they can have an hour with no adult supervision to talk.
Is this something that came out of your head, or does this actually exist?
It completely came out of my head.
It seemed like a really cool idea at the time. I mean, when I read that, I thought, oh.
Yeah, I think it came out of my head in that I know as a parent that I can't be a helicopter mom. Like, my kids are going to have to make decisions on their own. They're going to have to engage with people their own age and learn how to manipulate those, not manipulate, but be in those situations without getting themselves in trouble. And so when I was writing Harbor Me, it could have gone either way, right? It could have been the Lord of the Flies because the teacher leaves them alone, or it could have been something else, and I chose the something else.
Rena, in Hendersonville, North Carolina, I think maybe if the two girls weren't there, it could have been Lord of the Flies. But Rena in Hendersonville, North Carolina, you're on with Jacqueline Woodson.
Hello, Jacqueline. It's really, really an honor to talk to you. I am a middle school librarian in Hendersonville, North Carolina, and I actually grew up in Greenville, South Carolina.
Oh, wow.
But we have most of your books in our library, and I can't wait to read Harbor Me. But because I grew up in Greenville, Brown Girl Dreaming does have, you know, a special place in my heart. And I just wanted to say thank you, because growing up as the little white girl in Greenville, I feel like I was oblivious to what was really happening. And it wasn't until I remember Sterling High School burned, and then when they closed the city pool and put the seals in instead, rather than let the black people go swimming, that I began to wake up and see that there was a whole different universe. And so I wanted to say thank you, not only to you, but also the other authors that we have, to Jason Reynolds, yes, to Angie Thomas, to Mildred Taylor, Walter Dean Myers, that help us to understand, because truly we white people don't really get it. We will only see glimpses and get closer because of authors like you. So on behalf of my students, I want to say thank you.
Thanks so much. And thanks so much for mentioning those authors, especially Walter Dean Myers and Mildred Taylor, who are some of the authors who came before me, who paved the road and they actually did show the world what the American experience looked like. So thank you for using those books. Thank you for calling. And go Greenville. That's amazing.
Michael, Fayette, Alabama. Hi, Michael.
Good afternoon. Finally, at long last, I'm able to talk to an in-depth guest. Miss Woodson, I'm a big admirer and a huge fan of yours, although most of the African-American fiction I've read has been from other authors. My question is about, actually I have two questions about children's fiction and about the challenges or pitfalls of getting published. First of all, I'm hoping to get others, especially children, to elementary schoolers, to know what it's like growing up with a very rare birth autism and mental illness and so forth. It's like African Americans and Hispanics, you have to work twice as hard as one of us able-bodied white male Gentiles to achieve what they do. But I don't know the African American experience itself. I mean, I've read so much about it, and it certainly influenced my voting, along with Hispanics and American Indians, but I've never grown up that way. I've never grown up in dirt poverty either, even though we're from Appalachia. And I wanted to take this character that I'm developing, and two book series that I'm working on, and put them in, make them African Americans, not from here in Appalachian, Alabama, or Tennessee, or wherever, but in the deep South Black Belt, to create, and that was mainly motivated to create greater audience empathy and to expand the readership of children, different races and so forth, because I've read that you have to, if you really want to...
Hey, Michael, what is your exact question for Jacqueline Woodson?
Okay.
How to develop an African-American character?
Is it ethical for a white male, like white male Gentile like myself to do that because I've never to increase, even if the motive is good. I might say my background is not in English major in college. I doodled ever since I was a toddler.
Hey, Michael, I'm going
to,
only because we're running low on time, I'm going to leave it there. You gave us a lot to work with. Jacqueline Woodson.
So I wrote an article in Hornbook some time ago. You can find it on the internet. It's called Who Can Tell My Story? I suggest you read that. I think that the main thing I say is if you don't know anybody intimately in the group that you're writing about, it's going to be a challenge for you to write them. If you don't know anyone who could read it and say, well, you nailed it, or no, you just created a stereotype, it's going to be a challenge. I don't think you need to change the ethnicity of your character to garner more empathy or to widen the audience. That should never be the motivation for doing that. You should write what you know, and as long as you write a good story, it's going to do what you want it to do. But I think trying to write across lines of race just to try to grow the audience or because you think it's going to get more empathy, that's not going to work.
We haven't talked about The Other Side. Where did that come from? Did that come from Greenville?
No, The Other Side actually came right from Park Slope.
Really?
Yes, Park Slope in the 90s. When I was still a renter, we're going around trying to find apartments, and there were, every time you got there, it was rented.
Were you and Juliet together at that point?
No. I was single, and I was looking with my housemate, who's black and Filipina. And so, and then a lot of real estate agencies got busted because landlords were discriminating. They were saying, don't rent this apartment to a single mom, to a black person, to a gay person, whatever it was. And I had always thought of this as a very mixed neighborhood. It's not. And as I started walking around the neighborhood, I would see blocks where people of color had never lived, and then blocks that were all people of color. And then as the neighborhood started changing more, it would be very diverse during the day, and at night when the nannies went home, it wasn't anymore. And I watched it get less and less and less diverse. And so I started writing The Other Side, and at the same time I was going around the country, and I would go into classrooms where kids had never met a black person before. Like I was the first one they were meeting. And then I go into classrooms that were all black, and I started seeing the segregation around the country. And as you know, New York has the highest rate of segregated schools in the country. So I wrote The Other Side, and when I write a book, I get to choose the illustrator, but once I choose the illustrator, I'm not allowed to talk to them at all. So
You're really not?
No, you're not. We broke the rule for Showway because that's a family story. So Hudson and I met, and we were sharing photos and looking at sketches and everything. But with The Other Side, I saw the sketches. Then I was like, the clothes look a little whack, but I know Evie's going to fix that. Then I saw some drawings, and then I finally saw the whole book, and I was like, he sent my book back in the past. and I was so mad. But I realized, it took me a moment to realize that he had given me a gift, because segregation is much easier for people to talk about as a thing in the past. And so I go into classrooms and with this book, and they're like, yeah, that was in the 50s, and then Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks came around, and now we have no more segregation. And I'm like, okay, let's look at this classroom. And so it opened the door for me to get in these classrooms and have these bigger conversations about, yeah, let's really look at it. Has it changed? Yeah, maybe this looks like the past, but is it happening now? And, kids are astute. They're like, wait a minute, why are we all black and all our teachers white? Wait a minute, why does our class look like this? And, why does my and so people would ask me if I thought the fence was down now on the other side, because, this fence separates the black side of town from the white side of town. And I say, if you go home, if you can remember the last time your family sat down to dinner, not lunch, because lunch you sit down with your coworkers or whatever, with someone of a different race, then the fence is down in your family. And these kids would not be able to, so many of them like, nope. Well, what
Both
about my
black
babysitting?
Black and white, right?
Yeah, both black and white. I mean, with black families, I mean, it was less so because people had Latino friends. People had Asian friends. There was more mixing in neighborhoods that were more mixed with people of color. The white neighborhoods were white, but kids did try to pull in a babysitter or a nanny or something. Like, nah, that person's working for you. That person's getting paid to have dinner with you. But it was interesting because I think a lot of kids started realizing that what they were being taught by their parents about tolerance and equality and everybody getting along, the parents weren't practicing it. They didn't have friends of color, or they didn't know people who lived differently than they did. So in the end, I did appreciate E.B. and his illustrations, and then chose him for Coming On Home Soon, which is set in the past and worked out beautifully.
All right, a few minutes left with our guests, Jacqueline Woodson, Natalia, Woodhaven, New York. Go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. I just want to shout Jacqueline Woodson out and say that this is my first time seeing you on, ever after reading your work. And I just want to say, listening and hearing you, I am truly in love. I am in awe. I read your work, Another Brooklyn, and it changed my whole life because I lost my mother at a young age, and it was me and my little brother. So your character August and how she looked after her little brother, and also her father being concerned with the streets of Brooklyn. And I was born in Brooklyn. And your book really changed my life, and just to know that I'm not the only one that's getting impacted by your work. I'm one of the few. It's amazing to be able to experience your work, and I'm currently working as a youth advocate at a school in Brooklyn myself right now. So I can only hope to be able to impact the youth the way you're just impacting the world in your own way. So blessings to you, Jacqueline.
Thanks so much, Natalia. Can I just ask where you're working in Brooklyn?
She's gone.
Oh.
I hung up on her.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry. Jane, Olympia, Washington. Hi.
Hi. I have a question. How do we interweave empathy and the rule of law together so as to avoid an excessive swing towards feelings to the exclusion of facts?
Can you repeat that question?
Yeah, where are we going here, Jane?
Can you say it again?
How do we interweave empathy and combine it with the rule of law together so as to avoid an excessive swing towards feelings to the exclusion of facts, especially in public
feelings
policy?
And facts. Okay.
So what do you mean by rule of law? I just want to make sure I follow the whole question. And what do you mean by the exclusion of facts?
I see in the media, at least, I can see some behaviors in some people that are criticized, and then in conservative people, they're criticized in general by the press. Mm-hmm. But when I see those same behaviors in liberal people, I don't see them criticized. And I'm wondering how we can get back to applying a consistent standard for how behavior should be judged instead of based on the personal characteristics, whether genetic or religious or political, of the person with the feeling or the fact. And that same thing should apply across the board in how rule is applied both civilly and criminally, in my opinion.
I understand what you're asking. I think I'm a little confused as to are you asking me that as an author, or are you just asking that to have this platform on C-SPAN? I'm not sure.
She is gone.
Okay.
So again, I apologize. I'm pretty quick on that trigger sometimes.
Oh, okay. I was happy to answer it, but I was just I want to be clear on the question. So.
Do you want to leave it there?
I think I just wanted to be clear on the question, as I think the way the core is empathy. I mean, having empathy and having empathy in your own home. I mean, there's only so much we can control in the world, but we can teach our children. We can have these conversations with our family. We can have these conversations with extended family. We can have these conversations with friends, and we can be open. I mean, I think the thing about Harbor Me, it's not so much about talking, but it's about people actually listening to each other, not listening to because they're waiting for their turn to talk. They're listening because they're open to hearing and understanding. And I think that's our first step, is being open to hearing others' ideas and thoughts and opinions. I don't know. I think the issue of facts is a complicated one, and it's a much longer conversation that I'm not going to have on Bookspan, but I think that at the beginning, I say we still have to start with empathy. We still have to start with hearing each other.
Jacqueline Woodson has been our guest for the past 3 hours on Book TV's In-Depth program. Her most recent young adult title is Harbor Me. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Peter. This has been fun.